take this time to welcome you to the second annual Diversity in Clinical Trials Summit. Uh, the one we had last year was a big success, and we're hoping the one we have today is just as good or better. Our primary mission is to increase diversity in clinical trials and make those of us a lot more aware and educated and informed. I'm Otis Powell. I'm a primary care doctor. I've been practicing longer than you need to even know. Some of you all probably wasn't born when I started practicing. Yeah, I'm just a country doctor, principal investigator. I've done a lot of things. They always joke me and tell me I've worked in every hole in the state of Georgia, which is probably true. I've worked all over the state of Georgia, done a lot of things. I think nothing is probably more important than what we're doing now in increasing awareness of the importance of people of color in clinical trials. And Sonar Clinical Research is heading that charge, and we're definitely looking forward to some even bigger things than even what we're doing now. We do have food in the bag. Restrooms are to my right. We're still expecting a lot more people. I understand there's some international programs going on, and it's just sort of created a bad traffic situation, so we definitely apologize. We're going to move forward with the program as written with the first presenter, who is Dr. Vincent Aclinola, CEO of Sonar Clinical Research. So let's give him a big welcome.
Oh boy, following Dr. Powell's height is a little something, so let me adjust this 1 second here. I just hold this. Anyways, once again, thank you very much for everybody for coming. We really appreciate you. Like Dr. Powell said, it's an important mission that we need to do. It's one of the ways that we have to make sure that we build some form of equity in our community. And one of the things I always say is if we can't do it ourselves, it's going to be hard to expect somebody else to do it for us. So I'm really appreciative of everybody that showed up. This is our second year in this, and we look forward to doing many, many more. We look forward to collaborating with as many people as possible. And so I know the traffic is pretty bad, and so as people creep in, we just kind of catch them up on the program. One of the things I like to do first is just give a little introduction about what is clinical trials. If you can have the slide up. Let me see. Just give a little introduction on what's clinical trials, and the idea behind that is just for us to get a basic understanding. What does it look like? And highlight some of the challenges that we've seen in terms of this. Every single drug that's in the market today in the US has to go through some of this process. And one of the things we always say is we cannot participate in an equity space, in other words, equal representation and having the same outcomes. I don't know if there's a delay here. Let me try this again. Okay, so there is a delay. Bear with me. Anyway, so what is clinical trials? Clinical trials are research studies that test new treatments, interventions, or devices in human subjects to determine their safety and efficacy. Like I said, this is something that's very common in every trial, every drug that's in the market today. And so In clinical trial, there's several phases of clinical trial. It's about 5 phases in total. Wish I could get this a little fast. All right. So the 5 phases to clinical trial. The initial phase is the pre-clinical trial. This is when we still use a lot of the animal models, the pigs and things of that nature to kind of get, because they're so close to us genomically, and so we get as much data as we can from that. And you have to get an FDA approval to move into a clinical trial space post this. And so we build a lot of good profile from that. I'm so not sure what's going on now, but let's try this again. All right, we're just gonna, let's see. But anyway, so immediately we get to the preclinical phase. You have to get approval from the FDA, and that's the phase where you apply for what we call IND, and that's an investigational new drug. Upon the approval of that, you move to the first phase of clinical trial. Usually, and a lot of this, what I want us to just kind of get is going to be a lot of words in there, but a lot of information. But just kind of stay focused on what's the whole idea is, and which is just the multiple phases to clinical trial, the number of people that are participating, and the data and the information we gather as we move to the next phases. So for phase 1, usually less about 20, less than 100 for the most part. And usually this is where we have the first in-human trials, and so there's very, very limited number of people that need to participate. You build a safety profile, and then, again, you get an approval, and you move on to the next phase. Good. All right, which is phase 2. Now, in all of this, usually phase 2, again, you have a lot more people in the hundreds, usually less than 1,000. Again, we do the same thing, try to gather a lot of safety profile. Does this drug actually work in humans? Does it do the things we want it to do for us in the first place? And if it does, we got all that information. Again, we do get approval to move to the next phase, and that will be a phase 3. And then phase 3, again, even a lot more pool of patients are involved. And we see, obviously, as you increase the number of participants in it, then the likelihood of seeing more side effects or adverse effects that you may not see in a small amount of people, that increases. And so you get a chance to get even a better profile of the drug when you had more people to it. What's also good about this is at the end of a phase 3 trial, if your data is good and is well reviewed and approved to move forward, this is the moment where you actually apply for a new drug application. So, let's see. So FDA reviews it. It's giving a lot of steps that go into the space in that. And once that's done and you're approved, you get a drug. Now, here's what's important here. Once you have a drug, there's still what we call phase 4 clinical trial. And my argument is this is where a lot of us participate. So, so the drug goes into the market at the end of phase 3, and it's been approved. You go to your physician, he or she can now prescribe you this medication. And I argue oftentimes a lot of us will take these drugs. You go to your doctor, you ask a question, I'm going through this, and they say, oh, this is the best therapy for you. Oftentimes we trust their judgment and we take it. Now, and that's okay. We have to trust our physicians. That's fine. But sometimes if we were not part of the participation in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, the drug may not give us the desired effect when we get when we start taking it. And so there is a big change or big difference in genetics, in age. And this is the definition of diversity. And I know we're going this era where the whole idea of DEI has become very politically charged, but diversity doesn't mean black. It does not mean white. It does not mean Asian. It does not mean gay. It does not mean anything. It's a combination of all of these things because it interlinks together. Social determinants of health, educational level, poverty level, access. So these are all the things that put together into diversity. So now why is this important? like we've talked about, why is this important in terms of clinical trial? Like we said, important in terms of safety profile. Can this drug work, can it not work? Can it work in us or not? Also reflects the population of the drug, population that would take or receive the drug post-approval. Now, one of the things that I've seen recently that's been nice, and I think this is a post-COVID era thing where there's been a lot of push to be inclusive in everything that we do. And so the federal regulations, there's a federal requirements now, I think it's House Bill 1627, somewhere in there that actually encourages a lot of the clinical trial, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies to actually go out there and put in what are the steps that they would take to achieve diversity in clinical trials and make sure that there's equal representation in their drug profile. So I pulled this information out. So in 2022, this is directly from the FDA website. In 2022, about 37 drugs and novel therapies were approved. And so what I did was check in there and just look at, of the drugs that were taken, that was approved. So we have the group that says to treat lung disease, autoimmune inflammatory disease. 6 drugs were approved to treat that. And of the 6 drugs that were approved to take that, all 6 drugs in combined, and the total number of participants, our representation as we see is only 4%. That's it, that's all we did. So how much of this can we truly then say, if a doctor prescribed this medication, and we've heard online, we've heard everywhere, oh, this does this, or, and then we take it, we have new side effects. So that's one of the reasons. Same thing, particularly when we talk about blood, kidney, endocrine disorders. And we talk about things that affects us a lot more. Cancer, again, our participation rates is just equal across the board. Again, equally is bad for every other ethnic group. I mean, that's just what it is. But 4%, and we are just not, we're not getting the best out of all this. So we need to find a way to participate. Now, I always say, I do know this is not in the vacuum, okay? There's been a history about what has happened, and we'll get a chance to talk a lot about that today. Let's see if I could. Thank you. I'm glad we have my wonderful big sis, a pulmonologist here in the. Now, this is a pulse oximeter. Again, this is directly from the FDA website. Now, almost everybody, in fact, I would argue every single person in here has been to a physician for whatever reason. And when you go in there, you get this pulse ox, try to see what is the kind of, what is the oxygen saturation in your blood. What the research found, and so there's a group in University of Michigan, I think, during COVID. What they realized is the sick patients that they had at the ICU at the time, when they do arterial blood gas, in other words, when they take the blood out and then look for what is the oxygen saturation in their blood, it was a different number. But when they used the pulse ox, it was a different number. So the patients were presenting as if they were sicker, but the pulse oximeter was showing that they're not that sick. And so that's the issue. So they found out, and this is directly from the FDA website, like I said, again, they put out this, but it says multiple factors can affect the accuracy of a pulse oximeter reading, such as poor circulation, skin pigmentation, skin thickness, skin temperature, current tobacco, and use of fingernail polish. But what I want us to stay focused on, and this is the title, Racial Bias in Pulse Oximeter Measurement. So this is actually the title of the paper. It's in the New England Journal of Medicine. So again, these are issues that we need to pay attention to. And like I said, a lot of us have been using pulse oximeter for God knows how long. Probably as long as Dr. Powell has been practicing. So. Another thing, data here that I put from a KFF, that's just pretty much an independent organization that kind of look around and see what is the social outcomes of folks. Generally just do nice research on that independent group. And in this study here, what they've done is this. It looked at what is our overall health and our health outcomes. So in other words, how do we fare? Excuse me. How do we fare overall? mental health, healthcare access, education, food, good food, grain, organic, decent meals in our communities. And they compared that of every ethnic group, compare that to the Caucasian or the white population. And this is what they found. 55% of African Americans fare worse than their counterparts. 55%. Pretty much a whole bunch of us in here. And that's a big issue. That's our community. So we need to do something about that. And so this is where we talk about health equity, where we talk about health outcomes. This is the studies that shows a lot of this, including in this involves also the access to good medications that work on us. I put this in here to say this. Everybody in this room today is a stakeholder, okay? As long as you're a person, you've ever fallen sick, you take any medication, you are a stakeholder. Stakeholders are not just the pharma companies, they're not just the FDAs and the institutions. We all have a responsibility to ourselves, our community, to participate. Now, and there's so many things everybody can do. For the sponsors, we talked about this, and we really engage them as well. They say, okay, you need to make sure you have a diverse force. You have to make sure that when making the selection of the clinical trial protocol, we should not be at the back of the barrel in terms of the decision making. We should not be an afterthought, okay? When the clinical trial protocol is being designed, we have to have people in there who are making that decision and thinking about their home community as well. And so if they do that, some of the things that reduces or makes it hard for us to recruit patients or want patients to participate will be addressed. The other thing we talk about to the pharma companies, they have to build trust in the community. One of the challenges we have in our community is we feel like everybody come in when they need us, and then once they're done, they disappear. And then we wait again. When they need us, they're back. It has to be a consistent engagement at all times, not just when they need us to participate in the trial, because the reality is still the business form. And once the drug is approved, do you have a commitment to make sure that in our community, there's some kind of discount or there's some form of access that we will have to these drugs that are so expensive that we can't afford in the first place? You know, are there going to be social programs put in place to make sure that we can even participate in trials in the first place? So there's a lot of things that we're talking to a lot of pharma companies that we work with, and I'm so proud of Takeda. Thank you guys for being here and your leadership, Lachelle Robinson. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. And Novo Nordisk is not here as well, but they've been a strong supporter of this. So we really, really appreciate that. But those are the things that needs to be done. And then even on our own end, as the physicians and the research guys, we also have to have a diverse group. We have to make sure that I was reading on another research, and it said a lot of people do not participate because they're not asked. Now, we're pharma bias because we feel like, well, there's a history of us being this way and that way, so folks ain't gonna participate in the first place. Well, just ask. Give them a chance to say no. You know, so that's one of the things that even on the research side, the physician side, the staff side, we also have to do it. And as patients, we have to be educated on this. We have to be aware of this. We have to ask questions. You need to know, are there other options of therapy? Why can I not try it? It's an education piece for us as well. So we need to, all of us need to be aware and participate. We've put together, and we're working with few pharmaceuticals here. We have our partner, Learn to Win, and we've put together some courses along with the wonderful Andrea who's coming up next. So we put together some courses, and we'll be rolling that out to some of the folks who actually need it, so we can actually find a way to improve our society and our community in all of this. And finally, equal representation is in clinical trial, or in any way, matter of fact, mostly in clinical trial, is not simply a matter of biology, but a matter of equity, fairness, and public trust. So as we walk away and as we listen to the rest of this, I want us to put this into thought process. We'll talk about health equity with the folks coming next. These are the things that we pay attention to. Equal representation goes deeper. And it's our responsibility as all of us, everybody in here, those stakeholders, to make sure that we play our part so that come 10 years, 15 years from now, as a whole, we are healthier and we can live longer. All right? So thank you very much, and we look forward to the rest of the conversation. So now I'm going to bring in the wonderful Andrea Penn, and she will introduce our group, and they will be talking on disparities and inequalities in healthcare. Wonderful panel. We look forward to it. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Penn. My background, I am a nurse practitioner with experiences across clinical trials, such as being a sub-I, a CR representative, and doing clinical trials, across different sites. And so with me today, I would like to welcome Yusuf Enriquez. He is the founder and CEO of Indigenous AI, a precision genomics company aiming to create the world's largest blockchain encrypted digital health platform of indigenous and diasporic African clinical genomic data. Mr. Enriquez is also a serial startup visionary and passionate about technology, financial health, and equity. He enjoys mentoring the next generation of founders and was recently named a 2022 TechStarts Mentor in Residence. Prior to his startup ventures, he served as a regulatory affairs expert. He launched his career in the regulatory space as the acting branch chief of OBGYN gastroenterology urology divisions at the Center for Device and Radiographic Health at the FDA. He also served as a director of regulatory affairs for SAIC, where he oversaw regulatory compliance strategy for multi-centric clinical trials. He also managed a $45 million scientific portfolio for a large multi-center clinical trial research product in PTSD and TBI for the VA Department of Defense, and he is a Howard alum. So thank you for coming with us today. And next, I would like to introduce Dr. Todd Ellis. He's Global Co-Lead in Health Equity and Access and Developed Markets for KPMG International. He is Principal Health and Government Solution at KPMG in the US. He has more than 20 years of healthcare experience in the payer and provider sectors and uses his industry knowledge to drive sustainable value-added change. As a principal at KPMG, he currently leads healthcare government solutions practice for health equity, electronic records, and process automation. As the global co-lead of Health Equity and Access, he collaborates with numerous KPMG colleagues around the world on a suite of approaches to address health, equity, and developed markets. He's certified in several managed care and clinical applications and specializes in enterprise selection, design, and implementation. Innovation, and he serves as an adjunct professor for Morehouse School of Medicine. So thank you for both for coming today. So to get started, we'll talk to Dr. Ellis. We've heard a lot about health equity, healthcare outcomes, and social determinants of health and so on. What does this mean, and how does that affect the average, everyday person?
Well, I guess first, thanks for the introduction. You made me sound better than I am, so I thank you for that. But I always look at health equity as a matter of life and death in our communities. When you really think about it, it's that important. If we don't get it right now, especially with the onset of AI, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, and it will have a major impact in the field of medicine. My biggest fear is going to be what we're dealing with now when it comes to advanced technologies. And I'm going to bring it home. I'm going to bring it home. Advanced which is moving at a very fast pace. If we don't get that piece right, Because understand, AI is built on data. If you don't have good, diverse data to build those algorithms in AI, the gap is going to widen in our communities. You start talking about clinical trials and understanding population health management. If we don't have diverse data, the gap will widen, not only in clinical trials, but when you start talking about physicians using algorithms to diagnose me, my children, my wife, you. And if it's not built on diverse data, I'm telling you, we're going to be so far behind that it's going to be hard to catch up. That's my biggest fear, and that's life and death. If you have an algorithm that's going to say, give this medication to Todd based on his genome, but the genome was mapped to, it wasn't mapped to me, it was mapped to white European, right? That's going to be a bad situation. So, please.
Thank you. And at KPMG, you're working with global health equity. What is some of the work that your company is doing, and how does that build more equitable health outcomes?
Yeah, so we look at this at a global scale. We have offices across the globe, Africa, South Africa, you name it, China. I just got pinged twice yesterday from Australia and also Singapore. So a lot of the health equity issues that we're dealing with is global. It is global, right? And so as the world becomes more diverse, and it is becoming more diverse, right? We have to, and again, I will say a lot of times when I'm in rooms, I'm the only person of color in a room, right? And I've been doing this for 20 plus years. And that's shameful. So if I wasn't in the room, what type of discussions would they really have if I wasn't there representing diverse communities? And believe me, sometimes I'll be in rooms and I do ask, how diverse do you know the community in which you're talking about? And a lot of times people will roll their eyes, right? They'll be like, oh God, here's Todd again, right? But that's my responsibility. That's all our responsibilities to speak up, whether they like it or not. Because again, if we were not in a room, if I wasn't in a room, we will not have a voice. And for so long, we haven't had a voice. We haven't. So I'll take personal responsibility and accountability at KPMG, not to sweep this under the rug, because I've seen it being swept under the rug. So that's my responsibility, and that's what I do at KPMG, whether they like it or not. And I'm sorry I had to say it that way. So.
Can you tell us, like, what sort of companies does your company partner with, to help these initiatives?
Yeah, so we partner with every major life sciences company that's out there. We're in every, I would say major hospital system, right? But all organizations, they have an agenda. Let's be honest with you, right? At the bottom of everything is about making money, okay? And it's about making money. So we can work with life sciences, we can work with providers, payer organizations, but we have to do more KPMG to work with the community, right? We can work with the payers, providers, life sciences companies. They got to make their own commitment to these communities, right? They have to do that. We can't force them. But I think we got to take more responsibility and also understanding what the community needs and being out in the community. And it was said earlier so nicely. In these neighborhoods, the perception is you're doing it to us and not with us. We come in, right, pharmaceuticals, we get what we want, and then we leave. And we got to reverse that, right? These life sciences companies got to commit to being in the community 24/7. And that's how you build that trust. You got to be there when it's the good times, the bad times, be present. And I think once that happens, and I know Yusuf, you're going to talk about, your thought process on that, but once we make that happen, you will see the needle move. You really will.
Okay. And you mentioned that when you're having some of these meetings or some of the companies that have consulted your company, that it could be Singapore or other countries around the world. Are you seeing the same issues in those companies as you are those countries as you are here in the U.S., or are some things different?
No, I think you're seeing, like, social determinants of health is an issue no matter where you are on the globe, right? it is the same. But you know, what's interesting is this. What I'm going to say is very controversial here, so y'all can run me out afterwards, okay? If you look at the demographic of the U.S., and even globally, but I'm speaking about the U.S., we're going to become very, very, very diverse. We already are, but, you know, the minority will become the majority. I'm not going to talk about which class. The minority is going to become the majority. My fear is this. If you have other countries developing pharmaceuticals, for an example, in Asia, and there's nothing in Asia, if they're developing world-class pharmaceuticals, who do you think that's based upon? It's based upon their culture. It is. Not necessarily African American or Latinx. So my fear is, as the demographics change within the United States specifically, if we start focusing in on certain classes, we're going to be in the same boat from an African American perspective. The time is now for us to take ownership and really, really argue the point that first, we got to get diverse data in our clinical. We have to as African Americans. But moreover, we got to take that data and really start focusing on, you know, it's not just about having the data, but what comes next? Precision medicine. Can you imagine a day when I can go down to a CVS, Walgreens, or wherever, and say, my name is Todd Ellis, this is my genome. Now, based on my genome, you make me a medication that's unique to me, right, in my genome. You know, that's next level. Now you're really talking about moving the needle with regards to health equity. We're going to get there, but we got to do a little bit more work in our community to get people to come to the table. We have to.
Thank you. And Mr. Enriquez, we'll go to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your role with the FDA involving drug approvals, particularly safety parameters that are in place before any clinical trial is approved?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So yeah, what Dr. Kinola put up on the screen is really the process that FDA, when I was there as a reviewer and regulator for both devices and drugs. Not a lot has changed except for the bill that he mentioned that is now putting a lot more focus since after COVID on really putting emphasis on making sure that these trials that are being submitted are considering diverse population. So the slide that were presented earlier, I'm glad they were presented that way because we need to get a crayon and color in some of those white trial participants that you saw there, because that's the graphic that we need to understand in our community, because that's what's currently, when I was a reviewer, that's what I had in hand. And the regulation didn't require that previously. It just required randomization of the trial participants. Unfortunately, when you dig a little deeper in doing an MIT hackathon when I started the company, systematically these sites that are set up for clinical trials are not favorable to the Black and brown community. Therefore, when I was at Mount Sinai doing a large clinical research with PTSD, I had veterans, which are a lot more open and can have conversation, being that I'm a veteran as well, said they had to take 2 buses and a train to come to a clinical trial site. Who wants to do that? Then some of the social determinants of health, no daycare. So if you have to come and give different time points for these trials, who's gonna take off work and who's gonna watch the little ones? Some of the other areas that I fought with when I was at the FDA is, as you know, women weren't included in some of these trials early on in drug development and clinical trials. So you've seen systemically over decades, the system that's set up to yield European white males in the trial. It doesn't matter if the government or pharma throws $4 billion at it, we have to re-engineer and redesign the entire clinical trial system that you saw presented to you earlier, because it's gonna still yield the same results. And so that's been troubling for decades that I've been working at the agency and left. And so COVID really heightened it, right? As you saw the different phases and trials. I'll give you a personal story. I became a consultant to to companies that now are trying to figure out ways how to address the diversity plan issue. And so that phase 3 trial that you saw, 1 to 3,000 patients, we had a pharma company that were looking to get their phase 3 trial approved by the FDA. And unfortunately, they only put 7 patients of African descent as their milestone. So I don't know if you have your phone, you could do your calculation. If you do 7 divided by 3,000, so it's even worse than what you saw Vincent put up there about the 4%. That one trial alone, which is moving into that cell, gene therapy, novel therapies, that's what scares me at night. My daughters have a rare eye condition, and so the only medication that was on the market, a cell therapy treatment, was never tested in African American or women. And so, but it costs $425,000 per eye, and I have twin girls. So you can multiply that to see the bill that was gonna come with that. To round this out is what I'm worried about now is we've just seen cell and gene therapy for sickle cell get approved. But what I feared and what Dr. Akinola mentioned is the costs. Our communities are not involved in the trials, and we're not gonna get access because those 2 cell and gene therapy that just got approved are $2.1 million and $3.1 million.
And Dr. Ellis, I know you've done a lot of work with payer, and can you tell us a little bit, expanding on what Mr. Enriquez just talked about, the cost of that therapy, how is that reflective, as far as disparities within different populations?
Yeah, is anybody here, I gotta check myself, anybody here from the payer community? I'm gonna offend you a little bit, and I don't mean to. No, honestly, you can take me to the side afterwards, okay? No? All right, just be gentle with me, okay? Okay. So before I answer that question, wouldn't it be interesting if we find ourselves in a time when, how on food, cereal boxes, cigarettes, whatever you want to call it, we pay a lot of attention of the ingredients, right? We do. Like I go to the store and I read certain ingredients, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if you got a prescription and they had on the bottle, this was tested in certain communities, 90% European, 2% African Americans, 1% Latinx. Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that change the way you look at that medication? Could you imagine what Yusuf just said? There are some medications with 0. If you went to your pharmacy and they gave you a medication and you looked at who was tested in the generation of this medication, and you saw 0 African American, you would think twice, wouldn't you? The data's there. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not forcing that? We force it everywhere else, right? Right? I guarantee you if it came to that point where you had to put the percentages of the population that was used to develop this medication, things are going to change. You don't think these pharmaceutical companies are going to raise their eyebrow and be like, oh, geez, right? You don't think providers, more importantly, you don't think our community would start to think again about, do I want to take this medication? Do I want to give this medication to my pregnant wife? Think about that. Why are we not pushing that? The data is there. Why are we not pushing it? So can I get an amen? Amen. All right. Now, what was your question? I'm getting myself, oh, Jesus, Lord.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass the offering plate around. But no, I'm very passionate about this, and I think about things like that. I really do. The data's there. But for the payer organization, payers, they have a place in this world of healthcare. The problem is there are thousands of payers out there, right? They have to make money. They manage populations, right? Their goal is to, of course, I would say improve healthcare, but payers really dictate where you go, whether you like it or not. They dictate where you go. They dictate the type of medications that they will pay for, right? Right? So what happens when I'm a single father? I'm doing everything I can to provide for my family, but I'm making minimum wage. Now, go back. And they're giving me a medication for my child, and I'm looking at the percentages. And I say, wow, there's been no African Americans in the creation of this medication, but it's gonna cost me only $10, but this other one over here, where it has 80%, is gonna cost me $300. What do you think I'm gonna do, right? So I think as payers, they need to become a little bit more flexible about understanding the communities in which they serve. And it's not a cookie cutter approach. Most payers, in my experience, is cookie cutter, right? But also employers. Employers got to do a better job too. You need to understand your employee base, right? If I have 80% Latinx, 10% African American, and whatever, I need a very unique benefit package that's going to cater to them, and not a cookie cutter saying, oh, just give them this benefit package, whatever, right? That's the type of stuff we need to be pushing for, right? So payers are good. I'm not knocking what they do, right? But for so long, we've just taken it for granted that it has to be a certain way.
Mr. Enriquez, you're the founder and CEO of Indigenous US. That's a great name. What's the work that your company is doing, and how will that work be important when we talk about clinical trial participation, drug development, and disparities?
Hold on. I've known Enrique for some time now. Listen to this guy's one of the smartest people that I've been around. And he didn't pay me. No, seriously. When I first met him, he blew my mind with what his goal and initiative is. And in my opinion, everybody should be lining up. Everybody should be lining up to partner with you. So I'm sorry, please.
As I mentioned, really this formed out of my work that I was doing previously with the VA, where we developed a blood test for PTSD. That work led to me being called on in the COVID crisis to do a hackathon, hacking racism in healthcare. And so we really looked at some of the things that we've talked about today, and one of those verticals was lack of diversity. Because for the first time, we had 8 billion people in the world that were trying to stay alive. What Indigenous is really focused on is making sure that, one, the lack of diversity in clinical trial is there, addressed, because we need more data, as mentioned. And then the area that we're focused on is genome sequencing, because when I looked at the spectrum, it's probably the most untouched area as far as drug development and drug design, because that's new. What does that mean? We don't have a big denominator like what we have currently. And so if we wanted to re-engineer how the clinical trial is right now and sprinkle a couple of more Black and brown people in that data set, it wouldn't move the needle. The critical mass of what Dr. Ellis has mentioned is that whole genome sequencing and just sequence in general is about 0.5% of the world has had their whole genome sequence. So what is whole genome sequence? It's the upgraded version of which was done with 23andMe, which was a direct-to-consumer play. Didn't really give you any value other than make you, dress up from what country they thought you were from, right? But I gave them credit because it introduced something new to the community, and a lot of Black folks and Hispanic folks signed up and paid $99 to have their DNA sequenced, but it was saliva. So what we're looking at is whole genome sequencing on a way how to correct the clinical trial process with bringing more minorities, educating through seminars like this about getting those type of testing done, so you understand what some of the predispositions that you have in certain conditions, because you have some things that are hereditary, but then some things are from genetic mutations, from some of those things you saw, social determinants of health, environmental factors. And so it's where Indigenous is really pushing is to increase the largest repository of African and Hispanic diaspora genome, because unfortunately, the UK Biobank, which was heralded as the savior for for cellular gene therapy, just unveiled their data. And no surprise to me, why I started the company, they've recruited over 500,000 participants. However, only 10,000 of those patients, got calculators again, 10,000 divided by 500,000. And these are what I'm fearing. This is the data sets now that's going to be moving into that right side of that chart that Vincent mentioned around novel therapies. So with an 88% European or white repository, we're now moving into precision medicine with a data set that still doesn't represent us. And to sum that up, that's why that gap, that digital divide is going to be wider than what we had before.
Well, thank you for that. It's amazing work. I know for sure that genetics do play a part in treatment algorithms, as you talked about before, and that some people with certain genomes that maybe one treatment may not work for them. Can you expand a little bit on that, or tell us a little more?
Yeah, so we're moving in the area of pharmacogenomics, where, I mean, again, just from the demographic and where you're from in this room, say you had 3 pharma companies with 3 medications for the same disease area. Because you're a woman, because you're a Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, those 3 medication, you would be prescribed A, B, and C. So, you know, what we're looking at is looking to do traffic light. We call it the traffic light test: red, yellow, green. So with just your genetic profile, we're able to sequence that data and look at which one of these medication fits you best. Now, it's not going to be 100%, we know, but at least that moves the needle of making sure that you're taking something that's going to be safe and effective according to what the FDA standard is. Because right now, they don't really know. And so that's one of the low-hanging fruit areas with this new next generation sequencing technology that has now emerged. So sequencing of the whole human genome was done about 20 years ago. And so this technology is what I've been trained on, members of my team have been trained on, to now look at your pharmacogenomics and how you metabolize certain medication. Because we now have statistical data that shows that African American and Caucasian metabolize certain medication differently. And that may be the first step that we try to get to with making sure that everyone in here are put at least on a medication that's effective for the condition, instead of just handing out, you know, medication based on when they're approved. Because as Dr. Akinola showed you, you don't really know what you're getting until it hits the population. And my quote is, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu.
Yes, that's 100% true. And I'll present this question to both of you. I know you mentioned earlier, Dr. Ellis, about artificial intelligence and how that's going to play a big impact. And either one of you, or both of you, can answer. What learning with AI have on the future of healthcare drug development, access, and how can we be more involved as a community?
Yeah, AI, I mean, you see this, it's on the news every day, right? AI is a big topic, you know, it's a lot of hype around it right now. And again, the hype is gonna continue, then it's gonna kind of even out a little bit, then it'll go back up. But AI will fundamentally change the way healthcare and medicine is delivered. I promise you that. I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the AI now is in the clinical setting, whether you're talking about a surgical robot arm that's been around for years, right? But, okay, just had a conversation on this on Thursday. So AI in the clinical setting, that's gonna continue to help docs, really, physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, understand, again, what other, I guess, options are out there based on a disease state, right, or prognosis. But again, it goes back to, if the algorithms that are built doesn't have data that's diverse, we're gonna be in the same boat that we're in right now. We are. It's just like a house. If you don't have a good foundation, the house eventually will fall. So we got to really push on the diverse data, the clinical data, because that sets the foundation for everything. Another thing too, the slide that was up with the, God, I'm missing my words, the measure the oxygen. Think about it. We talk about clinical trials and medications, right? What about technologies? We just can't stop with the medications, what you put in your mouth. But what about the technologies that are out there? They get tested too, right? What do you think they test those? Who tests those, right? What's the population? Because I'm telling you, the level of oxygen in your blood, that's life or death. You could die if it reads wrong, right? So think more broadly, right? AI is going to change the world. But we got to get, as a diverse population, we got to get comfortable with that technology. You can have the best AI in the world. Bad data, you're going to have the same result, right? If you don't know how to interact with that AI as a consumer, as a population, it's going to get worse. So we have to, on both ends, clinical, but the general population, it needs to come in the middle so that you can challenge what you're being told in the office, right? Based on your knowledge and use of AI and your understanding of the data. So.
Yeah, I think for me, unfortunately, this is so critical and dire. We got to do a lot of things in parallel. So on one end, the drugs, the device are no better than the drugs, by the way. So that was just one example of pulse oximeter not reading African Americans. We have AI tools now that are reading our African American women as men. So these are all things that are still, because of the technology, we don't have enough workforce of people that look of color, Hispanic, African American, that are in those rooms when these AIs and these codes are being developed so that we can consider some of these things, right? So if you think about it, same picture with all those little white persons, that's who's in these coding and providing the codes for a lot of these things. And of course, it's not, I don't think they do it intentional. That's just what they're, so the diverse population of workforce and training has to be important. That's where we put that on the pharma companies. That's where we put on the device companies. So that's one side. From the consumer side, which is where I'm driving, is we got to get more engaged. This type of settings you guys showed up. This is knowledge, how we able to change what has already happened in our community. We have an opportunity to change it going forward. And so we're not tied to what has happened in the past. And trust me, I talk about it every day. But one of the things that I think is going to be very key is that box that says patient and participants. Because at the end of the day, it's your data, it's our community. Therefore, we need to own it, we need to manage it, and then learn these technologies and not be afraid of them. Because again, AI, machine learning, we need to have more of our kids and students getting into these fields so they can talk to grandma about what AI is. Because where does grandma and parents get their information from? The younger generation. So those are the two areas that I think, I would want to focus on because we have more control there. And again, these pharma companies have to come to our community, so we need to make our demands on what we want this to look like and how we want to be treated going forward. And I think that's where you'll see that needle move as we start to take control, not just of our own community, but how our data is used and how those things affect us to make sure that we have the right devices and the right medication so that we can live healthier and longer lives.
Thank you. Do we have time for questions, Vincent? Any questions from the audience? Do anyone give him a mic?
You want a mic? Okay. Well, somebody could take, I guess I'm mic runner now. Okay. There you go.
He's right there.
You got it? Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. I have.
Test it.
Oh. It was one right there. Go ahead, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have a series of questions. Thank you for everything that you've said. My first question is, you were talking, Dr. Ellis, you were talking about data. So my question is, how do we, or what are the ways that we can provide the data for the algorithms? Like, we're not included, right? I have a doctor, so I'm an SMO, and I have a doctor that has, in Atlanta, she has over, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. She has over 40,000 active patients. And I've looked for studies for her for the longest. We're not involved. So how do we get that data to the pharmaceutical companies?
It's interesting because I did some work with Morehouse School of Medicine. We built a national database for COVID. And you know what's unique? The data is there, but it's in many different publicly available data. It has to be reported on. The problem is there's thousands upon thousands of databases out there that's not integrated, right? So the data is there, but it takes a lot of time to integrate that data to see what the data is presenting, okay? And a lot of those data sets that are publicly available, some have diverse data sets, some do not. We got to get to a point, honestly. African Americans, for an example, make up 13 to 14% of the population. Shouldn't that be the minimal requirement for any data set? Really, if you don't have 13% of African Americans or 19% of Asian Pacific Islanders, your data set is invalid. We got to get to that point because right now it's the wild, wild west. I could create a data set with one person of color and present it to the world. Present it to the world. So I think we gotta do two things. I think we gotta get to our senators, whatever you want to call. I know that could be difficult, but only then when real data is presented. Like when I told you a medication, if I want to see what the percentage of this medication was, where it was tested, I promise you things will change. You don't think pharmaceutical companies would be beating down the doors saying, oh my God, this blockbuster medication that I created is only going to probably fare well for this population. And I've just been exposed that this medication, this will not really represent Latinx or African American. You don't think things are going to change then? But we got to be the force behind that. We have to. And when that happens, I promise you, things will change. A lot of people are scared of the data because guess what? A lot of people are scared of what they're going to see. That's why a lot of times you don't see that data. But it's out there. Yeah. We could take that offline, so.
Okay, there are many things that I want to talk about, and we'll take
Can we
offline
expand?
especially.
I wanted to ask Mr. Enriquez too, a follow-up. Is there anything that the FDA does to track data, I guess, related to diagnosis code and different races?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, to some of the policy issues that we're having, right, in COVID, unfortunately, for some reason, race wasn't a critical data point. And so, you know, unfortunately, it's garbage in, garbage out. There's been no real guidelines of making sure that each data set has certain data points that will reflect the demographic in the community. So in your case, with 40,000 individuals in Atlanta, we're guessing that's a very healthy African-American, Hispanic populace, but we need our engineers, our AI, software to work with these communities as hubs. So I make the joke with Dr. Ellis all the time, I'm building labs in the hood like McDonald's, because it's gonna be, each community is different. If diabetes may be an issue in Atlanta, it may not be in Detroit. And so coming together as community-based organization, I was born, right? That's where this data core is gonna come from, because those individual physicians have collected that data, right? On a national level, CDC won't have that. Right. NIH won't have that.
Thank you. Do you mind if I let that gentleman answer one question first, and then we'll come back to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was reading the other day that there was a system that was used to determine the kidney functions of African Americans, to determine those who needed kidneys. A lot of African Americans who had been waiting for kidneys could not get kidneys in time because the test was race-based and the results showed their kidneys to be healthier than what they really were. As a result, they were put at the back. You had other patients from other races getting kidneys. Some of them died waiting for kidneys. found that to be appalling, that the test was race-based, had been given false results for all these years, and people were supposed to get kidneys put at the back of the line. So that in order to mitigate that effect, the ones who had lost waiting time were ordered to be put in front of the line. My question is, what can be done to prevent this race-based test that produce inequitable results to African American subjects, especially in other maybe liver, heart, whatever organs that you need to get? Are there other tests that are race-based right now that need to be investigated to prevent this inequitable results that we've seen?
What worries me about that is that study just came out, right?
Like a week ago.
I know exactly what you're talking about. What's shameful is all the people who have died leading up to this study and will continue to die because the process, the system is not fixed. So more people will die as a result. And if you guys didn't know, diverse populations wait the longest to get any type of transplant. We all knew that, right? For various reasons, we are the last to actually get a transplant, right? I know that because I have a sister-in-law who was the same way, and the only way that she really got moved up was my brother, her husband, going to the hospital and demanding, why she at the end for 2+ years, and she got a kidney as a result, right? But the point I'm making is this: we got to become more educated as a consumer. A lot of times when they say that we're at the bottom of the list, we just take it and live with it. We do. Sometimes I feel like we as African Americans, we are afraid to question a clinician. We're afraid to. My grandmother, I remember her go to the doctor and the physician comes in and says, we're gonna do this, this, and this. And she was so fearful of asking anything about her own care. She just believed in the physician, right? But we gotta, guys, I'm telling you, we gotta find a way to really use our voices more. We do. And we're all busy. We all have things we gotta do in life. And a lot of times we're just working and we forget these things. But we gotta find a way to have a voice. We have to. It's life or death.
Dr. Uche, can you pass the mic? Just a comment.
All right, I'm a physician, I'm a pulmonologist, so let me say, my practice is in East Point, and 97% of my patients are Black, brown people, underserved. So just to buttress what's being said, whenever I get a trial, they give me a BMI of anything greater than 30 cannot participate in that trial. And every single time I have to fight because people of color have heavier bones. And so the average person in this room who may not be obese by definition has a BMI that's greater than 30. Do I You talked about your grandmother. I have a patient who is now enrolled in a clinical trial, went to the hospital and was in and out of hospital with an exacerbation of his COPD. And so the next best step was, we're going to make you hospice. No, listen to this. He signed. I have my research coordinator here from my practice. I have my nurse practitioner here, so they can testify to this. He signs a piece of paper saying, I am going into hospice. So I said to him, when you're coming in, bring all your medicines with you. He brings in the medicine. I see morphine. I said, what are you doing with all of this? He says, they gave it to me in the hospital. I said, what did you sign? He said, oh, they asked me to sign. Where's the piece of paper? I don't know. I said, are you an idiot? What do you mean by you don't know where the piece of paper is? You literally signed to be hospice, and you do not understand what being hospice means. So you can't push it and say it's always them. At some point, we have to take responsibility and educate ourselves and give yourself a voice. That's why it's called informed consent. You ask your questions so you understand before you take a pen and sign your life away, not understanding what you're doing. So I'm asking, take responsibility. Take responsibility for your neighbors. The door that makes the loudest noise gets the oil. And so if you're not making the noise, and I'm not saying be disrespectful, I'm not saying be obnoxious, I'm saying ask your questions, understand what's going on, and if you come and give your good reasons, a lot of times you can change that. My BNMine for a lot of my studies, and they go there and they present it to IRB, and I present my strong reasons, it gets changed. I have a participant here who's going to be talking. Whenever he comes for all his visits, we get him a lift. And we insisted. He lives too far away. He can't drive. I need you to help me give him that money to be able to bring him to the trial. They never say no, but if you don't ask, you won't get.
Thank you. All right. Looks like our time is up. Wait, we have time
One
for
quick
more?
question, one last question. I'm a CRA. I'm actually speaking a little bit more on the pharmaceutical side. I was actually interested in getting your input on the situation. One of the questions that did come up during one of our meetings was, should we put more resources into bringing in more Black PIs, or put more resources into getting just more access to the African American population? And I kind of wanted to hear on your side where you would think those resources should be put in. Do you think it'll be more of a result in getting more Black physicians into the clinical research side? Because at least based on my experience, even after being a CRA for 10 years, I've probably only seen maybe about three PIs that were Black. And I've worked at a lot of different type of companies. So I just kind of want to hear your input.
Yeah, no, so that's the other, again, remember I told you, hacking racism in healthcare, it's multiple layers. So on the physician side, he's one of 5% that's African American physicians in the country. 95% of the physicians are white men and white women. So that's another headache and hurdle. And so, my position on this is you're absolutely right. A lot of R01 grants don't go to African American physicians and PhDs. So policy, NIH, those things are not, provided to individuals that are in communities that are trying to solve some of those disease areas that are in their community and went to medical school. More likely, a lot of these physicians lost a parent, grandmother to some of these conditions and took that as a study. But once it gets through that filter system, a lot of NIH, like you said, there's not a lot of PIs that end up getting those R01 grants. The other thing, in the community debate, we take that out the hand of NIH if we start to incorporate some of the physicians that we do know, like the doctors in the room, and start to do that aggregated within our communities. So, the biggest challenge is that we need to just be intentional, like what the doctor said back there. You have to be intentional at this point because it's not going to get any better. We need to have more PIs, more CRAs. I mean, the whole infrastructure, researchers, AI, machine learning experts that look like us. So the education piece needs to be there, workforce training and development needs to be there. And then again, start to put pressure on these government agencies that are not funding studies that are affecting our community, because you have the data, right? So these are things that we could go with data and then force and make the changes, because NIH is not gonna change the status quo of what they already have until you go and show data that supports making those changes.
You know what, the way I look at it is this. I don't know the exact breakdown of the percentages of different ethnicities or races, but I do know African American because I am African American. It is around 13 to 14%. I don't know why we don't have a 13% rule. No, really. I don't know why we don't have a damn I'm sorry, I'm passionate. Why don't we have a 13% rule? Until you can prove to me that your data is at a minimal 13% of what this population is, you get no federal funding, right? You don't get that opportunity, right? Until you can create a medication and that you could prove to me that that medication was based upon 13% of the African American population, you can't give that to the public. You can't put that in pharmacies. That can be done. We mandate a lot of stuff in this country, right?
I got a question.
No, please. No, the Tuskegee, right? I understand. We can, I'm gonna be quiet
Yeah, we're gonna
because
talk more about
Preacher
that,
Todd is
yeah.
about to
We're
come
gonna-
out. But
And
I
I can
agree with you.
interject on there
But we
real
got to
quick.
get beyond that.
Yeah, and I can interject
have
on the
to.
Tuskegee conversation real quick.
Can I-
We'll have a very, very engaging conversation on that. In fact, our speaker on our keynote, prime guy on the conversation. So we'll get a good conversation there. Please save those content questions, and so we can really have a very engaged
I only
conversation.
got
Please go
one
ahead,
other
Dr. Ellis.
thing. 30 seconds. I was on the phone with 3 prestigious medical schools this week. I'm not going to say the names, but one of them was an Ivy school, or Ivy League school, like the Yales, the Princeton, the Dartmouths. And I was talking to a physician. We were all having a conversation. And I said, what's going to move the needle when it comes to health equity and really understanding the under-resourced populations? And he's a good guy. He was Caucasian. He's a good guy, right? He said, well, Todd, let me tell you what I've seen over my 30 years of practicing and teaching medicine. He said, in medical school, we talk a little bit about social determinants of health. Just a little bit, right? We don't really talk about where you're going to go do your residency, if it's going to be in an under-resourced community, how you take care of that population. He said, we don't talk about that. All we talk about is the clinical, getting past step 1 and getting past step 2 so you can graduate to be a physician. That's our core. Then I said, well, if you have somebody going into Harlem, New York, well, Harlem is gentrified now, but if you go into an under-resourced community that don't look like the community, what do they know about that community? And they said, well, we don't really think about that, right? We don't really think about that. So I think medical schools have an accountability and responsibility to educate their physicians, not the physicians at Morehouse School of Medicine, because they do that day in and day out. But what about those schools where the medical class is 2% diverse? And there are hundreds out there, hundreds. We gotta do a better job within medical school to really help them understand the many different populations that they're gonna be looking after, because let's be honest, we all carry stereotypes, right? We do. And think about those students, black, brown, yellow, I don't care what you are. When you graduate medical school, and based on where you came from and what you don't understand about a community or a stereotype you may believe in, that's going to impact the care that you give to certain populations. So we have to do a better job in medical schools because they don't. They don't put a lot of focus in social determinants of health. And if there's anybody in this room that can argue me otherwise, please do. No hands, wow.
Okay,
So we
I
have-
want to ask Dr. Todd a question. I know you were saying that they don't take into account with the clinical trials of our ethnicity, but when they're taking our dollars, because I have a financial side as well. Okay, so when they're petitioning for Medicaid dollars and Medicare dollars, they take into account of ethnicity then, our race. So why don't they take that same type of stance when it comes to developing medicine or developing healthcare? And she says she has a hard time getting her patients seen about because of different things that they don't know. And that's basically towards our community.
All right, you know what? Next time we have this conference, you know who I want up on the stage? We need to have some senators. We need to
I
have
agree.
Ossoff, right? Warnock. Hopefully I'm not offending
Right.
anybody here,
No,
but they should be here listening to what we're talking about the 13% rule, right? All of that, because they're the ones that's gonna, we should have a governor here.
right, because
They're the ones that has the power to take that fight. But we're the voice, but they can take it because I think we're all in an echo chamber here. We know the issues, right? But we got to take it to the next level and get those individuals engaged. Because only when they're engaged and they take it up there will we see meaningful change.
Thank you.
And I think
Thank
we
you.
have a question online, is that correct?
Yes. So the question is, the challenges with access to clinical trials for some demographics has been highlighted nicely. That's just a compliment. Do you think study drug approvals should be delayed for all to ensure equitable diversity populations are represented in the data for marketing approval?
That's a great question. Mr. Enriquez, do you want to take that?
No, absolutely. I mean, honestly, if I was a senator or had a way to change things I think we've studied the European white male genome and the European white males data set for both devices and drugs. And one of the changes I would propose is that we be intentional and fund studies that only have predominantly African American, Hispanic, and Asian. That is the data set that we're missing. So why are we continuing to fund studies that are still yielding 80 to 90%? I just mentioned to you the newest database of biobank that's going to be used for cell and gene therapy just yielded at 88% out of 500,000. So nothing has changed until we reverse that to where it's 88% non-European white males. We're not going to move the needle on any of this because the data set today, both devices, drugs, therapies, are all one population. And so that would be my aggressive push to any senator that wants to listen, is that we need to do more trials that have more definitive intentionality around recruiting the right type of patients and then funding the infrastructures in these communities, because all the PWIs, so to give you an example, Johns Hopkins gets $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year. HBCU College of Medicine, 40 million, the highest, which was Howard University. And now during COVID, we've gotten a little bit more, about 60, 70 million. And that was really around the stuff that Dr. Ellis was talking about around COVID. Because guess what? I got consulted during COVID because none of the HBCUs that did a large phase 3 trial ever for College of Medicine that's in the HBCU community yet had never had the infrastructure to do a large multinational study in a pandemic. So that just goes to show infrastructure and being intentional where these dollars and taking these dollars from these large PWIs that are doing these mega studies, because what happens is they give those institutions the money and then give the crumbs. The Hopkins and the Georgetown then gives the crumbs to the the Morgan States, the Howards, to do the money needs to go there so we have the infrastructure to do large clinical trials.
Yeah, it's not, to echo that real quick, it's not, the work needs to get done, what Yusuf was talking about. The question is, who gets to do it? The work has to get done, who gets to do it? And I'm glad these institutions are getting billions, but institutions like Morehouse School of Medicine, they have to beg. They have to literally beg for money. That's a shame. That's a shame.
And it was only because of COVID that they needed more Black and brown patients, why they were even considered. The four college and Howard and Morehouse are tier 1 research institutions, just like a Harvard, yet you can see the discrepancy in the funding. So of course we don't have an infrastructure to do a large multinational trial. We don't have the infrastructure or the money to do it because all the money has been given to large institution that continues to get these grants over and over because they've been doing it for decades.
It's automatic. It's automatic. It's political. It's just automatic. Yeah.
I told that we're at time up, I believe. But this was a great discussion, and thank you everyone for your good questions. Thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate it.
All right, so the next panel is going to be about talking about what is the difference between a routine office visit in comparison to a clinical trial visit. And so what we'll have on the stage in the panel is two physicians who are still practicing and seeing patients in their respective practices and at the same time running clinical trials. And we'll also have two individuals, two patients who have participated in a clinical trial, and they'll give you a chance to talk about the experience, what they thought was different about it, and several other questions. And my very, very good friend, I got to get this right this year, Dr. Torp, wonderful lady. She's also CEO of Mize Health, and they do a lot of work with health education and things of that nature across the country. So please welcome Dr. Torp and the next panel.
Hey, everyone. I hope you guys have been enjoying thus far. That we're going to move into another sector of the conversation. And I think it's such an important one because we're talking with doctors who have their boots on the ground and the patients who are participating in these trials so we can get an understanding of what that looks like. So as he said, I'm Dr. Thorpe. I'm a family physician, so I see all age ranges. And I also do a lot of patient education through my company, Mize Health. And I've also been involved in the clinical trial process myself as an investigator. So a lot of different ways for me to hit this, right? So clinical research, as we've been talking about, has direct impact on the therapies that we prescribe. It has impact on the treatment options that we recommend. It even has impact on the diagnostic testing that we do. If you guys remember, basically the shift in age that recently occurred for testing mammograms, doing screening mammograms for patients, because we, black women, were basically not being diagnosed as much as white women with breast cancer. Or when we do get diagnosed, it's so far along in the process. So even diagnostic testing, clinical research is important for. So we need to stay focused about all the different things that really will be impacted with clinical research. And I wanted to mention this quote from the American Academy of Family Physicians. There's something called the Everyone Project. And they said, and quote, "Community engagement and advocacy for public health policy are key to advancing health equity at the societal level." And that's exactly what we're doing here today. So as we talked about before, that diversity is not just, are you black? It actually includes food insecurity, right? It includes transportation, socioeconomic status. So some of these things that we're not often thinking about, how are our patients able to get to the office for a clinical visit, much less to come in for a research study, right? So I'm gonna start off by introducing our first speaker. You guys got a taste of her before because she mentioned this when she was talking earlier. It's Dr. Orjioke, and she is, as she said before, a board-certified pulmonary disease critical care and internal medicine physician with a vast array of experience in clinical and administrative medicine. She earned her medical degree at the College of Medical Sciences, University of Calabar in Nigeria. Her early practice was first in Nigeria, and she later came to the United States and completed residency in internal medicine at St. Joseph Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. She followed that with a pulmonary and critical care fellowship at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, serving as chief resident of both and chief fellow. She also received an MBA at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She owns and runs Covenant Pulmonary Critical Care, Inc. in Atlanta, Georgia. The practice has a pulmonary division that provides inpatient and outpatient services to local and international patients. It also has a clinical research institute and provides critical services to community hospitals in the metro Atlanta area. So her focused approach and commitment to the development and implementation of hospital policies, quality assurance, and risk management programs has led her to serve in physician leadership roles in many hospitals.
Her passion for medical education and mentoring led her to serve as part-time faculty with graduate medical education and internal medicine residency program here in Atlanta. So welcome, Dr. Orjioke. So our next panelist is another panelist that was here last year, also contributed a lot to the conversation between physicians and patients, and that's Dr. Nweke. Dr. Nweke is a nephrologist, which is a kidney specialist, an internist, and a public health specialist with vast knowledge and experience from training across the globe, including Nigeria, the UK, and right here in the United States. He attended the University of Lagos in Nigeria, Barts and the London Hospital in London, and Johns Hopkins School of Public Health in Baltimore, Maryland. He is the founding trustee of Rubor Foundation, Inc., whose mission is to ignite the socioeconomic framework and enhance the potential of the disadvantaged and/or underserved subpopulations and communities across the world. Dr. Nweke has been practicing medicine for more than 15 years now. He believes that no two patients are the same, and as such, every patient should have each question and issue addressed with the utmost respect and dignity that they deserve. Don't we all wish that our physicians are all like that? Welcome to Dr. Nweke. So the next the next two panel members are both patients who have participated in clinical trials. The first, we're gonna welcome Mr. Corey Lewis, and that is one of Dr. Powell's patients. This is his first time participating in a clinical trial, and so we'll find out more about that as we discuss with him. The second is a patient of Dr. Orjioke's, Mr. Stanley Wheeler. Also first time participating in a clinical trial. Welcome. So we're so thrilled to have each of these participants on stage with us today. Okay, so in order to go ahead and get the conversation started, I'm actually going to start off with the patients in this case, and I just want each of them to go ahead and tell us just a little bit about why and how they came to the decision to participate in a clinical trial.
Well, hello, my name is Corey Lewis. I am 30 years old. I am also a sickle cell warrior, sickle cell SC. And I guess you could say I'm more of an unorthodox warrior. I don't necessarily have a lot of blood transfusions like other warriors. I'm not on folic acid every day like they are, but I do have organ damage that I've had to, deal with. But I thought me moving forward, getting older, I'm like, if I don't start taking some type of initiative to figure out how I can take care of myself without always having to go to the doctor, like what are those things, what can I do? So I thought about clinical trials. Most sickle cell warriors, they're always talking about clinical trials, but they are very scared of clinical trials because we don't know. And I thought the first way for me to get past that was to start putting myself and applying myself to it so I can be able to learn and teach others. So this was a pathway for me to get into clinical trials and show other people just like me that, you don't have
have COPD. It's a real hurtful disease. I mean, at times you literally just feel like you're dying. So I was just looking one day and I saw a study on it. I said, well, let me check it out. I called, went over, and they jumped right on it. And I'm telling you, I feel so good, okay? I mean, I think it was just my lifesaver. But it was just the most wonderful thing that's happened to me in a long time.
And what role would you say, Mr. Wheeler, did Dr. Orjioke play in you getting involved in this clinical trial?
Well, first of all, it was her smile and being sweet as she is, I didn't know what I was going to, but it's like, okay. I live in Decatur, they're over in, which is? East Point. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna make it over there, okay? If the wheels on this car roll, I'm gonna go see what's going on. And like I say, I went and they were just so nice, wasn't nobody trying to really convince me to do what I did, but I insisted that they do what they did. And it was great.
Awesome. And so I'm going to move over to Dr. Orjioke to ask, how do you typically discuss with your patients about getting involved in a clinical trial? What makes you decide to invite a patient to participate, aside from the eligibility criteria?
So generally speaking, first of all, you have to understand that the patients that you would approach have to believe in you as a physician and trust you. And then the second thing is you have a conversation. I talk about informed consent. You don't just say to someone, this is what you need to do, go do it. We go through it, we have the conversation, you're struggling, you're at the end here where I honestly, as a physician, this is all I've got, right? These are the studies that are out there. These are some new things that are happening. I personally would encourage you to get involved in this. And sometimes that is 2-3 conversations. And you can see Mr. Wheeler here, we've had to bring him in sometimes to even talk to some patients that are on the fence. And I say, well, talk to him. He's gone through this. Hear his experience from a patient standpoint. And the other thing I say as well is, you say to me, I don't want to be a guinea pig. You're going to be a guinea pig either way. Either you get involved now so we can understand what this can do. You get to see me every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. You get to talk to me. I mean, you don't have to pay to do those things, right? No copay from your insurance. If anything happens, you slip on the floor, has nothing related to the trial you're going through, you call me. Right? So you're going to get the best medical evaluation experience that you've ever had. It's almost like being in first class, but you're not paying for being in first class. So we have those conversations. Sometimes they say to me, I want you to talk to my daughter or my brother. It takes time, but I am yet to see any patient who has agreed to participate in a trial that's ever come back to me to say it was a bad experience. Every single one of them have said it's a good experience. So let's see what it does. We monitor you closely. For some people, it's the first time they ever knew they had hepatitis, because you have to run a barrage of tests to make sure it's safe for them to even get involved. So all in all, I really believe it starts with a patient-physician relationship. They know you've always done the best for them. They know that you have them at the center of your heart. It's not just about getting a new medicine out there. It's about you participating. And I say thank you every time they come in, because it takes a lot of courage to step up to the plate, to say, I'm going to be one of the first people that this is even tried on. And so I appreciate them for what they do. I make it as comfortable as possible. My study coordinators sit with them, have coffee. We learn the ones who like raspberries, the ones who like figs because they forget to wear their dentures, the ones who we just get to know them so they become a part of our family, and we do the best we can to make it a pleasant experience for them.
Thank you. And Dr. Nweke, so we were just talking about health equity and we're mentioning getting patients into the office to get seen. And Dr. Orjioke just spoke about all the different things that they do in their office to make a patient feel comfortable when they come in to get seen. What do you do in your office typically to get patients comfortable? And what do you do also if they are someone who's on the fence about participating in a clinical trial?
Yes, thanks for that question. I agree with Dr. Ojoke. It's similar in the sense that ultimately there has to be that sense of trust, between the patient and the provider. Whether this patient is a patient who, found you online or, walked down the street, or an established patient, that level of trust has to be built. We are known for providing, to have listening ears, as a practice. We spend time with the patients, listen to them, it's surprising that, you can imagine that, when you go to certain situations where, you have to be in and out 15 minutes, 15 minutes is never enough. For my practice, especially, dealing with a lot of sick patients, chronic patients, as a nephrologist, it takes more than 15 minutes to review the medicines. Yeah. So that's just one of those things that we do differently. I usually instruct my patients to bring their medicine bottles, and 10 out of 10 times, my staff is there, there's always errors. I don't care how much list you have in the EHR or whatever, there's always errors, in those medicines. Half the medicines you prescribe is not what you have, and vice versa. So those extra things, is what we have found to help build, trust, build good relationships with our patients. But at the same time, there's always going to be, that resistance from some quarters in terms of, I don't want to be the guinea pig. Someone else can do that. But to Dr. Ojoke's point, ultimately, you're still going to be, because if you're taking medicines that have not been tried amongst our community, you're still part of, some form of trial, phase 4, like Dr. Akinola said. So the fact that you're consuming medicines, you're still part of, a post-marketing, trial that's still going on even after it's been approved. And if you are not part of it at the beginning, it doesn't help us as a community towards the end. And then finally, for patients who have a little bit of resistance, irrespective of whatever relationship that they built, it's really just more education, providing them, either the informed consent or a brochure, take home, research more, provide them with links to websites, do more research, discuss with family. More often than not, half of the patients will still come back, okay, I've talked to my spouse, my children, as the case may be, and then they will enroll. For some other reasons, for some other patients, it might just be, work. That's usually a big problem, having to commit to a trial based on work schedules. Some patients work at night, and so things like that. So those are the few situations where, even whether with interests, we still see some challenges in our community.
Thank you. And so just as you mentioned, whether it be taken off from work in order to participate in a trial or whatever is going on in the home, I'm going to direct this question to you, Mr. Lewis. You participated in an inpatient clinical trial. So can you talk to us about what the process of that looked like for you? And was it a challenge in terms of having to take off from work, or how did it kind of impact your home life in terms of your decision making?
I could definitely say Dr. Vincent and Tayo probably could, they could say they had some trouble trying to get me into the office a few times, but that was because of work. And a lot of times too, it was like, well, do I have enough gas to get there? Can I get there? And then for that weekend, It wasn't an issue for the weekend. I didn't mind staying over, but I did, in my back of my head, I was like, okay, well, you know, I need to start putting things aside just so I'm good for that weekend to stay. So I think it's just making sure you communicate in advance. I think that was the biggest help for me.
Got it. Mr. Wheeler, you participated in outpatient trial. So for those of you who may not know the difference, an inpatient clinical trial means the patient is staying in-house, kind of like a hospital stay. And then the outpatient is just as if you were going to the doctor to be seen. You have specific visits that you go into the clinic to get seen. So, Mr. Wheeler, you participated in an outpatient trial, and you said that you live in Decatur and had to go to East Point. What challenges did you encounter trying to get to those visits to make sure that you were compliant during the study, and how was the office helpful in mitigating those?
Okay, after almost killing myself a couple of times on that highway trying to get over there, you know, I can't have CK here, you know, pretty bad there. But anyway, they started offering me an Uber, which was the greatest thing. I felt spoiled. I felt just really taken care of, you know. Just call an Uber, you know, and they'll call me in the morning. What time you want us to send your ride? Okay, so not even have to be in at any certain time, you know what I'm saying? So you always feel better when you have running stuff, you know. And they're just some of the best people over there, I'm telling you. It's like going over there, I'm going to hang out with my sisters, you know. We just giggle, I'm in everybody's business, saying bye, you know. But at the same time, we're taking care of business. And yeah, I do like the coffee. And at times I can turn the television, you know, depends on who's up front. But it's been a real pleasant experience. And my thing is, every time I see somebody in there, I'm trying to figure out if they're in there for the same reason I am. Because anybody hits that door and wants to inquire about the, you know, trial, I'm there to tell them, hey, you need to try it, you know. I mean, it's nothing like it. I've spent so many nights and days in the hospital just, you know, thinking, okay, well, God, is this next one going to be the end or whatever, you know. And now I'm looking for another day, okay. Let's do it again, you know. So I just like it. You know, I can't say enough about them. I cannot say enough.
Okay, thank you for that. So I wanted to kind of bring in more of the health equity conversation into this, which is, it was brought up before, about, you know, if we were to see on the prescription bottle how many patients were participated in the trial from each population, what would likely happen, in my opinion, or at least for the patients that I've had, many of them would say, well, I'm not taking this, right? How, for both of you, Dr. Orjioke and Dr. Nweke, how do you typically deal with patients that are not trusting of the medications that you're prescribing, not in the clinical trial setting, but when you are practicing clinically, that they're not trusting the medicines that you're prescribing? How do you explain to them the benefit of taking it when you may or may not know if it was tested in our populations accurately?
Unfortunately, when there's lack of data, you just have to go with how the patient does with the medicine. So I'll give you an example. The long-acting beta agonist with the long-acting corticosteroids, right? You have Symbicort, you have Advair, you'd be shocked how a patient will not respond to one, but the moment you switch them, they respond to another one. True story. I have a patient, and this is more with my young asthmatics, my brown and black young men who are asthmatics. And when I say young, between the ages of 21 to 35, they're macho men. So, we don't need to be taking this kind of stuff. We have an asthma attack, we go to the ER, they give us a few puffs, and off we go until the next attack, and that attack ends them in the emergency room on the ventilator, and then suddenly the light bulb goes on that asthma is a real disease. He has a friend that takes Ventolin, so when his insurance won't pay for the albuterol, he will pay his friend to go see the doctor to say, I am having difficulty with my breathing. They give him a prescription, and he takes that prescription from his friend and fills it and uses it. So that's just real life world, because you respond to one, you don't respond to the other, but they're all meant to be colas: Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Dr. Pepper, Shasti. They're all colas, but everybody has a preference. It's the same thing with the lungs. So what you're saying is real, but until we have that data on the bottles, you just have to do trial and error. If this is not working, let's see if this one will work. And if this one works, that's what we're going to stay with. And when insurance doesn't pay for it, unfortunately, they go on the streets and get it some way, somehow, because this is what works for me, and this is what helps me breathe.
Very, very true. Dr. Nwiko?
Yes, certainly. It's been said multiple times. We all respond differently to medications, and there are genetic reasons, there's social reasons, there's community reasons why we may or may not respond to certain medicines. And literally in every specialty, whether it's nephrology or cardiology or endocrinology, you'd find medicines that would not respond to a certain group of people or a certain patient. And my experience is the same. If you try one, it doesn't work, you try another one. But to the point that has been said over and over again is, if we had enough representation in these trials, then the frequency of the trial and error would reduce, because we would know what agents or what compounds would meet the needs of certain demographics. So certainly, it still comes down to the fact that it just needs to be appropriate representation in participation in clinical trials.
I'm going to go back to the patients for a second. I just want you to speak to the audience to let them know if you had any complications during the process, with whether it be the treatment regimen that you were receiving, and how was that dealt with? I know for you, Mr. Wheeler, you said that you've been treated wonderfully.
It's been great.
But if there's any specific things that happened during the course of the trial that kind of came up that had to be addressed, and how it was addressed and how it made you feel moving forward?
I haven't had any issues. Even from the first, dose of medication that I took, it's just, it's hit and go, you know what I'm saying? So I think the longest part about it is waiting to see if I have a reaction. But nothing, it's good. It's good.
How about you, Mr.
So for me, it was the blood issue. Giving the blood, I was a hard stick in some cases. So that was like a big issue for me. And then to continue to have to do that like every 3-4 hours, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little frustrated with it because, consistently getting poked. I did tell myself that maybe if there was a better way of doing this, maybe this will be a reason for people to come in to do more clinical trials, because they know if they have to continuously give that, giving blood, there should be some type of IV or something putting that back in, if that makes sense. So I just think, it was great, a great experience, but that was one thing that I did feel like I don't ever want to have to do that again if I do this again.
And So not only is participation in clinical trials at the patient level necessary, it's necessary for physicians to get involved also. Now, I'll speak for myself. In medical school, I did a lot of research, but it was not clinical research usually. I was one of the few that got involved in clinical research pretty early on, but it was something that I sought out. It's not something that we typically talk about. And so I don't think a lot of us have the understanding that we can participate in clinical trials in this way, meaning most people coming out of academia feel that, oh, you just have to write grants to the FDA for funding. But the way that our clinicians here are practicing, I just want them to speak to that a little bit. And what would you say to encourage other physicians that are just starting out? How do they get involved in the process? Because they may not know.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Right. Yes. My story is somewhat similar. You know, I didn't really have any sort of focused clinical trial training going through medical school or residency or fellowship beyond the usual posters and a couple of papers here and there. But I obviously saw that there was a need, and I did eventually was passionate about representation and equality. And when I started to look at this data, which is publicly available, it became clear that obviously that we needed to do something. And that's how I got involved. And believe it or not, I was introduced to Dr. Akinola, and he was someone I would call and say, hey, tell me about this process, that process, and I started to learn about how to set up a team, where to go to look for these usually industry-sponsored trials by pharmaceutical companies, and taking some online courses, getting some basic training, GCP, hiring a consultant to train the staff and get us ready to be able to conduct these trials. And over the years, we have, developed a team. We found it, and just not just me, but the staff. I found it very engaging part of the practice. It's patients who are involved really enjoy doing it. They get, like has been said, first class care. The reasons why there are trials is anything can happen. You can have adverse events. You can have, and that's why there are trials. We're looking for safety and efficacy. So, I think we should state it here that things can still go wrong, and that's why it's a trial. But the way that these trials are designed is such that when things go wrong, they are picked up on time and addressed. But to your question is to also to continue to get other colleagues, to not just have them refer patients to you, but also get them involved in providing this as a service to their patients. And I think it's just one other physician at a time. And that's what we're doing.
I would say, how do you, I'll put it to Dr. Orji, how do you then encourage other practitioners, really, this is a forum of doing it, but in what other ways do you encourage other practitioners to really get involved? Because sometimes it can be a really daunting process if you don't have a Dr. Akinola to ask. How do you make yourself available so that people can learn kind of how to go about it?
So my experience was not a very pleasant one. It was pretty much like it used to be in residency and fellowship. You show up the first day and they throw you into the water and you sink or swim. That's how my experience was. And because of that experience, and we had a summit at our practice about a week ago, and I had about 3 or 4 physicians who joined us online, and it was like 9 to 12, just talking about the clinical trials experience. And I decided that I was actually going to put a program together because it's not easy. So let's just start out there. It's like you going out to start a practice. You have to take care of billing. You have to have your MAs. You have to look at how you're going to do the marketing. So if anyone says to you, oh, it's an easy process, no, it's not. But they're not telling you the truth of the matter. It is not an easy process, but you have to have a structure in place. And so those who have come to me, I've said to them, we have to sit down and actually have a discussion so you have a structure in place. Because the first thing is, as PI, as a principal investigator, you have responsibilities that have to be taken care of. Most physicians run away from private practice and outpatient practice because of the paperwork. There will be paperwork. You're going to have to decide in investing, am I going to invest in an electronic system or am I going to do paper? If you do paper, you're going to have the capacity at your site to store paper. Then you have to have a negative, what's the difference between a negative 20 and a negative 70 fridge? I don't know. Until I got into clinical trials. I didn't know there was a difference. A 3,000 rev centrifuge and a 1,000 rev centrifuge, there is a difference. I didn't know that. And then when you've done all of that, you have to understand about having a clinical research coordinator. What's the difference between that and a research assistant? When a clinical research, when they come to audit or look at your books, what are they looking for? What's an ICF? I did not know. I am a physician, but I did not know because every industry is different. All right, they say, okay, the sponsor will give you money. Oh, we're going to give you $10,000 for a patient. Ooh, lots of money. No, it's not. Because you have overheads. You have to pay your clinical staff. You pay electricity. You have to have lease. Your space has to be in a certain way. Those patients have to stay in the study. Someone has to call them to encourage them. Someone has to sit with them. There's so much that goes into it. Now, I went to school and got an MBA because when I started my practice, I did not know about money. Nobody teaches you about money in medical school. We just heard about health equity and social determinants. Nobody teaches you that. They give you a stethoscope. They teach you biology, pathology, but they don't tell you have to pay your bills. They don't tell you that bit, and no one teaches you about that. So I went to get an MBA because I was growing a practice, and I truly did not know what to do. I knew I saw 20 patients today, and I billed for it. Who's going to collect my charges from the insurance company? It's the same thing with the clinical trials. You send an invoice to your sponsor. Somebody has to follow that money up. Otherwise, when it's time to pay your research coordinators, there's no money in the bank. So you also have to decide which trials are you going to take. You have to go out there and find participants for the trials. The inclusion-exclusion criteria, by the time you're done, you may screen 60 people to randomize one. Nobody tells you that. So when they approached me, I said, I'm going to be honest and real with you. This is what it is. You have to have some sort of business model. How do you want to run your business model? What kind of trials are you going to do? What combination? How many research coordinators do you need to run 5 trials? What's that day going to look like? What is your profit and loss statement? Do a budget. You have to sit down and think about those things. When there's an SAE, you have to report it within 24 hours. I didn't know that going in. And they give you a manual that's like 200 pages. And you do that for 5 studies. That's in addition to running your practice. All right? So am I enjoying it? Absolutely. Is it exciting? Absolutely. It's nice to be on the cutting edge of the new things that are happening. But you also have to sit down and count the cost and sit down and think through it and get someone who knows what they're doing so that you're not sinking and swimming to be able to get into it. That's my advice. So I actually told myself in the next 6 months, I'm going to put a program together that allows for people to ask these questions and look at your site and look at what you need to truly start something, keep it going. Again, I don't say we're disadvantaged, we're challenged because there are not a lot of us out there doing it. So it kind of limits the exposure you have and who you can do. But you need to sit down and talk to someone. Don't let someone come to you and say, oh, you just need to be my PI. And then it's like, yeah, let's go be PI or somebody. And then somebody comes with this ton of paperwork. You need to sign. Oh, I'm signing. So it's an exciting world. As much as we want our patients to get involved, I encourage physicians that are of color to get involved in trials. Some people, it becomes their exit strategy from practice. They end up just doing trials, and it truly is exciting. It truly is. But you have to be realistic as to the goals you're setting, and you also have to be realistic as to what you need to get into it and to do it well. I hear it a lot from the CRAs that come to my site, that one of the things that sponsors have issues with is that the Black and brown sites, our data integrity is not what it should be. We spend days, weeks responding to queries. Those are the kind of things they track. So whenever they come, they look at us with a microscope because the expectation is that this site is not going to meet standards because of this, this, and this. So I've heard it from a lot of the CRAs that we have. So if you're going to run a site and run it well, I think you should sit back, do your homework well, look at what you really want out of the site, and talk to people, so that when you're doing it, you do it right.
Thank you for that. So just for the sake of, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any questions from the audience or from online.
And just to add to what Dr. Ojioke said is, for intending and investigators, if you get started, don't start with 5, please. Start with 1.
That's great advice.
So, Emmanuel Ademene, I'm a nephrologist. Great discussion so far. I've learned a lot. And having lived through COVID with so much controversies around vaccines, I know one of the requirements to get into studies, to get people enrolled, is to, get them vaccinated against pneumonia, meningococcal vaccine. How do you navigate patients being resistant to being vaccinated to get into trials?
Okay, so for me, it still boils down to this thing about trust. And so remember, you can, at least for me, if you're starting out with a trial, I think like maybe a blood test kind of trial, not the one where you have to do all these multiple procedures and stuff that you're not used to. But it's still that same conversation, because if you have a patient, as a nephrologist, if you have a patient that has end-stage renal disease on hemodialysis, pneumonia vaccine and flu shot is meant to be part of their treatment anyway, right? Routine treatment, nothing to do with trials. So you start there, because if you can't get your patients to do their routine care, how are you going to get them to do something they've never seen or felt or whatever before? So it still boils down to the trust. So you are not getting vaccinated because of the trial. You're getting vaccinated because that's good medicine and good care. That just happens to be one of the things you need for the trial. So that's how I would start. This is what you need just because you have end-stage renal disease and you're hemodialysis. However, if you choose to be in the trial, it happens to be one of the things that are required.
And we're going to go.
Make sure you get it. Hi, my name is Elaine. It's so wonderful to be here to hear this discussion, because I've been in the industry for a long time, and just like Dr. Ellis says, you go in the room, it's just you in the room. So I'm super excited to be here. I want to say to the patients, thank you so much for participating and for sharing your story. I think it's very impactful. And I forgot your name, but one of the things I would suggest to patients if they want to participate in clinical trials, definitely ask those hard questions. So like you said, for you, you felt like having all those blood draw was overbearing. And when we talk about the informed consent, pay attention, listen, read the informed consent, because it does tell you you're going to do. And as a patient, you might not know, but those are some of the things, if you're considering participating in clinical trial, you want to look at the informed consent. It's going to tell you blood might be drawn every 4 hours. And so you can have that conversation. Could they put in an IV line? For some trials, they probably can, but for some trials, they probably can't. And the other thing I wanted to say to the physicians in the room, I think when we look at clinical research, we also have to think about it as a continuation of standard of care, right? Offering it as a treatment option or an option for our patients before they get to the point where they feel like there's no other option. So I think for the physicians who are wondering, where do I start? How do I start? When you have your patients, they're on 6, 7 medication, you're trying to manage them, you're just having a hard time, think of clinical research as a continuation of care.
Thank you for that. And
Can I just say something real quick? I heard what you said, the informed consent part, and this is the part where I feel like I hear it from a lot of different sickle cell patients. We understand the informed consent, but I do think a lot of the times it's different when you're actually in the process of doing it. And that is where I experienced it. I understood my informed consent, and I felt like I had a lot of meaningful conversations with Dr. Vincent, but I also do feel like me in that moment and experiencing it myself, that's when I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. You see what I'm saying? And that's the part that a lot of folks don't have. They don't have that, oh, I get it, because you're just reading and you're just listening to someone. But when you actually have to go through that, it was different. I didn't know how to take that. When I had to go home, I was trying to figure out how I'm supposed to get my blood cells back up, Do I need to eat some more food? So I think that's I just wanted to point that out. What you said was a great point, but when you have to deal with it yourself, it's different.
And I just wanted to make one point, and we can take one more question. If you are an employed physician, please read your contract before getting involved in a clinical trial, because your contract may tell you that you are not permitted to participate without the say-so of the organization that you are working for. So typically, if you are in private practice, you get the ability to make that decision for yourself. But if you are employed, check your contract. Okay, last question.
Hi. First of all, thank you for everyone sharing your story and your experience with being involved in clinical trials. So I know there's been a push for decentralized trials and making it more accessible for the patient to participate in clinical trials. So I was just curious, for the trials that you all have participated in, have there been an aspect of telemedicine or home health visits, and how has your experience been with it, or what your outlook on that, moving towards a DCT type of framework?
So from a physician standpoint, and this is, they offer it, it's offered. So one of the trials that we have is a subcutaneous injection with the option of the patient being able to give it to themselves at home. They also gave the option of home health but for me and my patient population, there were two things. One is them coming in to the office allowed for me to build a relationship. And so it was a shared decision. They preferred to come in so that we would have that time when we talk about what your daughter is doing, how the guy that you're living with is, what's going on. So for them, it was more than just a trial. They were becoming part of a community and a family. So whenever the option came up, they still preferred to come in. But it was given to us as an option. But for my patient population, they preferred to come in to be a part of the trial than having someone they didn't know or whatever come to the house to kind of take care of them. The new trial we're getting involved with asthma, instead of having in-house spirometry, we're actually having off-site spirometry, and it's just being tried for the first time. So that they will come in and we'll do a dummy So they will do that spirometry in one of the rooms. We will be in the other room to make sure it's done right. So that option is being made available. And of course, we've talked about AI and things like that. So I think going forward, we will continue to do that. But for you starting out early and you knowing your patient population, I think you as a clinician have to make the decision. Is this something they can do tele, or is this something that they have to come in for? I have patients that live Columbus, Georgia. Oh, you can do telemedicine for the next visit. No, I'm coming in. They will drive those hours to come in. And then I have one that lives down the road. No, Dr. Ojoki, I'll see you on the phone. So it's preference. It's preference.
While this is a great conversation, and I appreciate all the questions and the panelists, in the interest of time, we're going to have to end. So any additional questions we can ask offline. Thank you again. Thank you both for participating in trials. We so appreciate your contribution. And thank you both physicians for participating again.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How everyone's doing? Just a quick thing, if you have a program, can you look on the back of your program? Take a minute to look on the back of your program and scan the QR code if you're interested in the studies that our sponsors have available, and so does Sonar CR. If you want to get involved with Sonar CR, scan the QR code, put your information in, tell us how you want to be involved. If you're a physician, if you're a patient, if you're anything, a farmer, whatever. Let us know how you want to be involved with Sonar. And we do have a survey. And the survey is just tell us, what did you think about the summit? What do you want to hear for next year? What do you want to see? What are the new things that you want to talk about? Let us know your feedback. Thank you. And all physicians that are in the room, we do have CE credits. If you are not registered for the on Eventbrite, register. We're going to email everyone on the register list this how to obtain your CE credits for this summit. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying everything so far. And this is one of my favorite moments of this place, where we get a chance to talk to our keynote speaker. We have somebody today who's really going to be an exciting conversation. First of all, when Dr. Ruben Warren, when I first got introduced to him, one of the things that stunned me and got a conversation going with him, he sent me his CV, 37 pages. 37 pages. And what's interesting about the 37 pages, about 29 pages were nothing but just publications. I mean, true publications, New England Journal of Medicine and the likes. I mean, so this is an astounding individual. So Dr. Ruben Warren is the former director of the CDC. Dr. Warren is the former director of the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare and professor of ethics at Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama. So if you want to hear everything about the whole trial, we'll do it now. He's also former director of the Institute of Faith Leadership and adjunct professor of public health and ethics at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. From 1988 to 1997, he served as Associate Director for Minority Health at CDC. From 1997 to 2004, he was Associate Director for Urban Affairs at the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, where he led agencies responsible for environmental justice and minority health. In 2005 to 2007, he served as part-time as a Director of Infrastructure Development for National Center on Minority Health and Health Disparities at NIH. Prior to joining CDC, Dr. Warren was served as Dean and Associate Professor of the School of Dentistry, Department of Preventive Dentistry and Community Health at Meharry College, Nashville. He's also Clinical Professor, Department of Community Health and Preventive Medicine, Morehouse School of Medicine, Adjunct Professor, Department of Behavioral Science, Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University, both here in Atlanta. Dr. Warren earned his undergraduate degree from San Francisco State University's dental degree from Meharry, and has both master's and PhDs from Harvard School of Public Health. He has completed a 2-year residency at Harvard School of Dental Medicine in dental public health. Board certified in dental public health. Dr. Warren is Master of Divinity. He's received, I can go on and on and on. He has received countless awards, including Distinguished Harvard Alumni Award, President's Distinguished Service Award from Meharry, the Michael Alfano Award from New York College of Dentistry, promoting dental diversity in dental health. One of the other things I really like is this piece. His extensive public health experience at community states, local, national, and international levels, range from clinical and research work in Lagos University Teaching Hospital in Nigeria to heading the public health dentistry program in Mississippi State Department of Health. So he's, like I said, he's had countless of publications and contributed to the scientific literatures in public health. He's part of the Health Brain Trust for the Congressional Black Caucus of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ruben Warren. How you doing today?
Doing better and better.
I like it. So, just reading your bio, that's it. What's your story?
I follow good people, and I learn a lot from them. That's the best way I can say it. And everything that you read doesn't necessarily be true. So this conversation will help you to balance what you said and what you think. And what you think is really important. So I'm excited about the conversation.
So it's super insightful. We had at least a few breakfasts, and I've just learned quite a lot in a very short period of time. But let's get to the meat of the story here. So we talked a lot about Tuskegee and the study done there. It's been used as an example for reasons why community participate in clinical trials. Also, there's been lots of misinformation and disinformation. What's this true story about the syphilis trial done in Tuskegee?
It's first and foremost, it was the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee. Very different than saying the Tuskegee syphilis study. Secondly, in my view, it was not a study. So I don't even call it a study, I call it the so-called study. There is no written protocol before they initiated that study. Nothing was written. How are you going to do science without writing it down? So I don't even refer to it as a study. It was a so-called study. And it was the most horrendous episode in biomedical research in U.S. history. The worst. And they say it is over. I'm not convinced that it is over. How do you collect data and throw it away? Or do you collect data and store it away? That's a question you have to ask yourself, particularly those of you who are doing science. You don't throw data away. So I raised the question about, first, what were they wanting to do? Secondly, what did they do? And third, what do we do as a result?
I know in our conversations, so after the whole study was, the SOCA study was completed, there was a point where the U.S. administration, if I'm correct, President Clinton had to apologize, and there was a series of events that went on after that. Can you kind of shed a light on what was that all about and how you the President Clinton getting involved?
I'm a dentist, and I had a colleague who was at a conference in 1995, University of Virginia, on ethics. And he called and said, Ruben, had the federal government ever apologized for what happened in Tuskegee? I was associate director for minority health at CDC, and I didn't know. Matter of fact, in my graduate training, nobody ever brought it up. I didn't heard about it until he called. And I said, I don't know. I'll ask the director of CDC. And I asked him, and he said, I don't know. So it became important to find out. And so that was in 95 and 96. We pulled together a group of ethicists, public health people, physicians, community engagement folk, nurses, and met in Tuskegee, not in Washington, and asked them, what did they know? And they really didn't know much about the so-called study. They didn't know much, but they knew it was something that was ongoing and important. And it was exposed not by the federal government, not by the medical community. It was exposed by the New York Times. It just got busted. You see? And once that happened, then it became clear that something was wrong. And yet they didn't want to acknowledge what was wrong, who did it, and why. And we're not clear yet about the why. We know who did it, and we know who they did it on, not with, on. But we yet to really know what the consequences of that study, so-called study, is. I'm working with a group called the Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Committee, and that's the descendant family members of the men who were in that so-called study. And they're searching for the truth. And they have asked NIH, CDC, for the data, and they're still searching for it. So it's something that we've got to continue. And the thing that's most important for me is that not that there was an error, but that they lied. That's the issue. Don't start off with the error. They lied. And so, and then you ask folk like me and you to get involved in clinical trials. We don't have to know the facts, but we know something was wrong. And so we got to clear up what do we do to assure that doesn't happen again. That's the issue, and that's the challenge, and it's important for us to know that.
You know, there's been quite a lot of information for some folks. The SOCA study was an experiment where folks were actually infected with syphilis. Can you shed a light on what actually happened as far as you knew it, as much as you know about the SOCA study? And once you do that also, the next part of that question is, but how do we move forward from that?
First, from all that we can gather, we don't know that the men were infected. We don't know that. But what we do know that between those who were infected and those that were in the control group, it was back and forth. So some of the folk who weren't infected got infected, and some of the folk who were infected were not infected. So it's really not clear. What we do know that started in 1932, and around early 40s, the same physicians, scientists from the same agency did a similar study in Guatemala. And we know they infected the folks there. That we know. So it poses a question, an ethical question. How could the physician in Tuskegee not infect folk and then go to Guatemala and infect folk? It's a contradiction. So what I say is that we don't know. And it's okay not to know, rather than to affirm that you know when you don't. There's no evidence that they did, but there's no evidence that we can substantiate that they didn't when we know they did it in Guatemala.
I'm going to open that point just for anyone who have a quick question before we, as we keep. Go ahead, Eric.
So appreciate the conversation. So yeah, I was scientific advisor to Ben Crump, similar with the Henrietta Lacks story out of Baltimore. Same thing, same agencies involved. We took Henrietta Lacks cells in 1952 and were able to replicate that into a $1 trillion industry. And so, to your point, you see the similarity on the practices that have been conducted by certain agencies. Wanted to get your point because that's some of the hesitancy that are within the community when now me being a researcher looking to increase more diversity, we're seeing that those two stories are what are some of the hesitancy that a lot of generations have kind of shared. Now, I wasn't born here, so this is me understanding this research as I came here to the US from Jamaica. What's your opinion on, so now that we've had that settled with Ben Crump, with the first pharma company, we've starting to see that as a good starting point to kind of move forward within communities that, to your point, acknowledge that something was done wrong, and how do we build on that, that legacy going forward so that doesn't happen again?
We'll never really know in detail what was done, but we do know in detail how to prevent it from happening again. And I heard earlier about getting more scientists involved, black science involved in research. I think that's absolutely essential. But just cause you my color don't make you my kind. I want to be real clear about that. And so it requires an extra level of inquiry to be sure that we are doing it right. And that's beyond color. That's a starting point, but it's beyond that. And it's the system that really forces the violation. So that's where we start, with violations in the system, not with what they say is a biomedical in violation or bioethical in violation. That's a one-on-one engagement with individuals. That's important around issues of autonomy. That means you have the voice to speak your voice. Around benevolence, that's the intention to do the right thing. And justice, that's fairness. And as they say, they didn't go to Tuskegee because they knew Mr. Jones or Mr. X. They went there because there were low-income black folk. And they all weren't sharecroppers. That's the lie. They were folk that looked like, act like me and you. It was a cross-section. But the thing that was clear is that they wanted black men. And they invoked the term Tuskegee because Tuskegee had and continues to have the credibility in the black community. So it wasn't by accident that they said that Tuskegee syphilis study, instead of the United States Public Health Service syphilis study that was conducted in Tuskegee. So when you raise the question of the U.S. Public Health Service, and you raise the question of where is the research coming from now and coming through now? The U.S. Public Health Service. Where is that happening? And so it's the same system, and the question is, the hope is that the people in the system understand the error, and we have systems in place to prevent it from happening again. It's not based upon your goodwill or your intention to do the right thing. But who decides what's right? Who decides what's right? Everybody thinks that they're ethical. You know, nobody would say, I'm unethical, but your engagement is critically important. But in my view, you cannot be an unethical person and be an ethical scientist. Impossible. It's a contradiction.
Very interesting points on that. And just to echo on what the part that you said, one of the things I talked to about some of our colleagues is we have to have the ability to reject a trial. Just like you said, every trial that we take, we need to make sure that it does serve the community right. I know we do this all the time when we get a trial sent to us. We review all of the trials. We ask questions to say, are there some kind of protocol requirements that we have to carry that is not necessary, that has no scientific basis? I mean, for example, we had a study that required us to, we were looking at certain kind of patients, and they wanted us to do some, reject patients who had blood transfusion. Well, there was no need for that. There was another study that wanted us to do a little bit more testing that there was no scientific reason for. And so the ability for us to turn something down is important. We rejected another trial because they wanted to mix in the decentralization of the trial, but the patients who will participate in the trial were not going to get paid. So those are the things that we also have to look at for those of our colleagues that are in the trial space to be able to say no to some trial. And I think that in Tuskegee. And like you said, the idea of that was, again, to make this push to make sure this doesn't repeat itself. Tell us how that was created and how you got to become the director of that. And the work that you guys did now.
Well, I guess what I said, when I got that call in 1997, we went to Tuskegee, had the conversation at Tuskegee with the groups that I mentioned. And what we said was that the federal government needs to apologize. And then the conversation was that, well, who should apologize? And the logical response was, since CDC was managing it, the director of CDC should apologize. Does that make sense to everybody, right? The director of CDC at the time was David Satcher. And if you don't know who David Satcher is, just shake your head like you do. Born and bred in Anderson, Alabama, black physician, extremely accomplished. But how are we going to ask Dr. Satcher to apologize for something the federal government did? So the folk on the committee said, oh no, not Satcher, not CDC, but the president. Ultimately, it was the president who either knew or allowed it to go on. So the request was from the president, and that's how it started. And during the exposure, a giant, Fred Gray, Attorney Fred Gray, really was the one who pushed the issue and really demanded some reparations, if you will, for what occurred. So it was more than just give them some money and say you're sorry. And so what the federal government also said, we need to establish a bioethics center to prevent those things from ever happening again. Now at that time, and I think today, I don't know, there's a bioethics center at Oregon Black College University. There are universities doing bioethics, I'm not saying that, but a center dedicated to that. So we argue that it has to happen at Tuskegee. But to charge Tuskegee with protecting the whole country from ethical violations was insanity. So it was a no-win from the beginning. But what we did was set up the mechanism for that to occur. And that is to engage community in a way that allows us to hear what folks say, in opposed to try to interpret what folks say. And it's different, you know, and a lot of us that are doing science, whatever, we try to interpret what folks say, instead of asking them and taking it for what it's worth. So we set that center up to engage in hearing more than talking. And it was established with a comfortable budget. I mean, comfortable is about $2 million a year. And it was to do something. Tuskegee didn't know what to do. The federal government didn't know what to do. CDC didn't know what to do. So we did something. The engagement was to educate the community about the so-called study and how to prevent it from occurring again. But what I found as we went to educate, we didn't know either. So we went on another journey to try to find out what we needed to know. We went on a quote unquote, a listening tour around the country, starting with the folk from Tuskegee and the descendant family members. and started off. And what came out of that very clearly and published, it's not about trust. It's about trustworthiness. And if you have a history of not being trustworthy, why should I trust you again? So the intelligent, informed decision in the black community is, show me. Prove yourself trustworthy before you ask me to trust you. And I don't care who you look like or who you are. If you're working with an agency or a university that has not been trustworthy, if you're not careful, you will be not trustworthy. One of the colleague who's top scientist said, you know, I was at this university that was not trustworthy. And after a while, folk didn't trust me either. So be careful when you ask our community folk to trust some clinical trial. If you're not clear and you don't have some authority, then you'll wind up being not trustworthy either. And so where did they go to recruit folk for the Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee? Where do you think they went? Church. Y'all knew the answer. They went to church. And where do y'all go now when you're trying to recruit people of color? I know where you go, church. Okay? And when you go to the faith community, you usually start to the leadership in the faith community. Yes, and I'm an ordained minister, so I can speak with confidence. You ask pastor, are your folk okay? Convince your folk that it's okay, instead of asking the people themselves. We did some work with one pharmaceutical company. They wanted to understand why we had hesitation about engaging in clinical trials. And so we started a research project, and we asked the faith community, we asked civic society, NAACP, Urban League, and we asked HBCUs. And we asked the leadership, what's the issue? Who should we trust? The faith community said, we trust the scientists. The scientists said, we trust the faith community. Who do you trust? And why do you trust them? So the question is that we have to resolve is, what do you trust them with? And when do they demonstrate trustworthiness? And that will allow you to trust them in the future. But you don't start with trust me, you start with proving yourself trustworthy. And that's acknowledging the errors that you've made, or acknowledging your participation in the errors that have been made, and then build relationships from there. And it's not the helicopter in, you know, and the helicopter out. It's building a relationship. There's an area of ethics, a new area of ethics called slow ethics. I mean, go slow. Simply, go slow. Take time to build relationships. And when you go slow, you build relationships. So go slow, as urgent as it is. And the other thing that's really important in the conversation about clinical trials is, yes, build the trustworthiness and build the commitment, but also the assurance is critical. There's some areas where if something goes wrong with the clinical trial, then you have the response from the health community. But what do people come with when you start the clinical trials, and where are the assurances there? So it had nothing to do with the clinical trial itself, but it has something to do with the concern and the health of the people you're trying to serve. So look for the health of the folk you're trying to serve, rather than a quote unquote cure to the disease you're trying to resolve. Big difference.
That's a great one. Is anyone have a question in a moment before we move forward? So you talk about benevolence over beneficence. Obviously, the will and intent to do good versus what is beneficial. Now, I want you to look, give us a viewpoint as a patient who will be, taking the medication or whichever. And also contrast that from the process of that beneficence over valence. How do you kind of just merge both of those?
Those of you that are engaging, particularly those that are in practice, you build relationships with the people you serve. It's really, really important. And you've not only demonstrated benevolence, that is the intention to do good, but beneficence, which you're doing good. See, and it's important to distinguish between the two. The road, I won't say it, let me let that go. But the intention to do good can lead to bad outcomes. And so if you start off with demonstrably doing good, and if you're doing good, it's measurable. As a starting point, then that becomes the assessment or the evaluation if it's effective. So your intentions are okay. Yeah, and I'll leave that alone.
Well, let me ask you another question, just moving to a different area. Obviously, part of our sponsors are former companies, and how can we, part of our theme is to our events is always farmer, how can you help? In your assessment, knowing the history, knowing the hesitancy, knowing the awareness in our community of participation, also knowing the importance of participation, what do you think pharma companies can do to make this, at least address some of the issues that we have and just build in this same trust issue that we're talking about? What is the role of pharma in all of this?
I think it's acknowledging that one of the greatest challenges, one of the greatest barriers to health care is big pharma. And we start there, and then we work to how do you begin to build trustworthiness. I'm involved in a really exciting project, probably the one that's has me most excited. And I'm working with my alma mater. As you heard, I'm from Meharry. And we're starting a project to collect genome samples on 500,000 people of African ancestry. Just let that sit for a minute. 500,000 people of African ancestry. It's in the United States and on the continent. Now, contrast that with all of us in our age. And just sit with that for a minute. We're not trying to compare and contrast. Enough of that is clear. We understand that compare and contrast with diverse populations. Everything I've read over time demonstrates that black folk at the bottom. So we're trying to start with the beginning. We want to be sure that we do it right. So the issue for me, and I chair the ethics committee for that project, is protection. How do we assure that the folk we engage in are protected? And that's not an arbitrary thing. That's a very intentional. That's intentional. How do we protect the folk we want to serve from all the challenges, including big pharma? And that's a day-to-day discussion that we're engaged in. But if we don't do it, it won't be done. And let me tell you the major difference that I'm very clear on. When they collected the information for the U.S. Public Health Service SIFTA study at Tuskegee, who had the data? Who has the data? If you want to know anything about that, who has the data? You don't know? The federal government has the data. You knew that. Maybe I didn't ask it right. When I said the United States Public Health Service SIFTA study at Tuskegee, I said, who has the data? And to accept that, to know that, and know the difference between information and data is the difference. So the difference, and the family members are still trying to get the data, still trying. And we're going to get it, but it's going to take some more time. But with what we're doing with the work at Meharry, it's not Meharry, but it's the genome, that Diaspora Human Genome Institute, which is at Meharry. Meharry will have the data. And those of you who are in science, you know what that means. Meharry will have the data. And we will decide what to share and who to share it with. Intentionally, we'll be engaging HBCUs, and more recently, Morehouse School of Medicine is engaging in a similar project. So we're at the beginning. Looking at health disparities and all of that is important. That's the end product. Looking at the genome is the beginning. So we're not looking necessarily for disease. We're starting from the beginning. And that's really important. So I'm excited about it because they're not trying to go at the end. It's starting at the beginning. And it has never been done. 500,000, both here and on the continent. So the notion that there's no relation we're going to find out. We're going to find out. So that's my excitement for the next 10 years of my life. And it ought to be yours as well. Start from the beginning. And Morehouse is on it, Meharry is on it, and we should be on it. So you'll read about it, because we're going to publish about it.
I see some hands. Any questions?
And as you ask your questions, I've worked with Doc for a minute, and I trust him. And if he says I can be candid with y'all, I can be candid with y'all. So I want you to be candid with me. And if you have the nerve to ask the question, have the nerve to hear the answer.
Hey, docs. This is great. This is awesome. My question is, when you're studying the genome, are you also looking at epigenetic information as well?
Looked at what?
Epigenetic.
Yes.
Okay.
Any? Oh.
Be that is generally set up to make sure that the clinical trials are ethically appropriate?
Two things. The IRB really started as a result of the United States Public Health Service syphilis study. Let's be clear, so put the credit where it ought to be. Given that, IRBs are great, but they've got some real serious limitations. I've been on several IRBs, and I don't know, none that I've been on have had ethicists on them. And it's real clear unclear what you want the IRBs to do. You see, and I've sat on there and they invite community, and it's important. But if you're not clear, then community tries to be like the scientists. So the role is unclear. And why are you inviting? Because communities are not the same. And to be very candid, they invite faith folk from community. And they're at a disadvantage of what is the conversation about? You see, so we've got to continue to challenge. And I would argue that the IRB is late in the game. It's not how do we conduct the research, but what is the reason for doing the research? That's not an IRB issue. It precedes IRB. And the notion of biomedical research, that's really important, and it deals with, as you know, autonomy, benevolence, and justice. But another framework, and I would argue, is public health ethics, and that's community engagement. in addition to autonomy, beneficence in addition to benevolence, and social justice in addition to justice. And social justice is simply public health. So when you have the bioethics and public health ethics side by side, there are greater assurances that things will go right and not things won't go wrong. It's a different framework. We're not going to do harm than saying we're going to do good. Different conversation. What good is it? Not what harm we're trying to prevent. Different way of looking at the world. And I would say unless you're intentionally and measurably doing good, then doing no harm is not much help. They said in Tuskegee, we ain't do no harm. They didn't have nothing, so we didn't do nothing. But did you do good? And in your work, that has to be a critical question. What good is it going to be? Not what harm is going to be prevented. Different way of looking at it. It's like disease prevention versus health promotion. Two different ways of looking at the same thing. Maybe the same behavior, but doing good is different than not doing harm. And you're hearing my bias and unapologetically. Do no harm is not enough. Doing good is imperative, measurably good. Not charity, but justice.
In that conversation that you just made, I wanted to, for 1 second, go back to the 500,000 diaspora and genome project that you guys are working in, serving as the director of ethics in that. Now, how are you guys working on that as well, just to make sure that when all of this data is housed, Mahari, HB, anybody, it doesn't matter who houses it, the data still has to be translated into the real world, and that data is what is used to form policies, and that's really where the key is. How do you guys are making sure that when all of these data are housed, when all of this policy translated into policies or drugs or whatever it is going to be, what are you guys trying to do that to make sure that there is still an equity that is based, that is still there? There's a fairness system, there's a system where these folks that have generated this data will actually have equal representation, equal benefits, equal
an ethical way. So what we're really, we just had the announcement in October, so that's evolving. But we've got a committee of ethicists, formally trained ethicists, to have that conversation. And one of the persons on the committee is a woman, an ethicist from Zambia, to be sure that we can reconcile our conversations in a way that is really across the board. And we've got to figure out a way, and we will, because I raised the question when I started, about how do you do this without Brazil? I mean, you know, it's going to be difficult, and we will have to get Brazil in the conversations. Not there yet, but we will get it in there.
Excellent. Now, on another thing now, so I'm sure, I don't know if some of you knows, but the U.S. government, the Office of Monetary Budget, for the first time in about several decades, just changed how ethnicity and added more groups to ethnicity so that we can include more folks in that box. My question to you is this, I think we've had a kind of little chat about this. How do you think this will affect our community, and how do we still get a good outcome from all of that changes?
You're talking about the changes in how we define race and ethnicity, is that?
Yes, just the way they've just recently updated on how people will, yes.
Well, first and foremost, that OMB directive, Directive 15, describes racial and ethnic populations. I think it first came out in 1997, if I'm correct. And it was an era then as it is now. And let me tell you, the era then, that's clearly almost laughable. In the white or Caucasian population, they included Egypt. Did you hear that? they included Egypt in the Caucasian or white population, in opposed to African or black population. That was in 77. So when you get that, then you know something's wrong. So and then when it's the recent, they've included African American and black synonymously, and that would happen in the 90s. But black is a race, whatever that is, and African American is an ethnicity. So to make them synonymous is an error. So bad data in, bad data out. So and with all fairness, it was not a but in terms of federal policy, we've got to use that, and acknowledge the errors in the way it's collected, and then use it the best you can.
Now, for everybody who's sitting here, you know, like as always said, everyone is a stakeholder one way or the other. As long as you're a patient, if you're a physician, whatever your role is, you're still a stakeholder in one end. So what is the take-home message from your perspective in terms of how do we still all get involved in the conversation? I know we talk about trust and for the physicians and some of the guys out there, just, you know, making sure that they're trusting the community and our patients is very important. But what is the role that the patients have to play in this as well?
The patients, I think from my perspective, my sense is that your work is not necessarily in the academy. And that's really important. I've been in the academy all my career, but the academy has its limitations. So the fact that you're engaged, you built the trust with the folks that you're trying to involve in clinical trials. So you have a perspective that many of us in the academy don't have. So I think that's really important to be able to articulate what folks who trust you are telling you and separate patients from the population. Most of our folk are not patients. They're the population, and when you're going out to build a clinical trials, you're looking for patients or looking for populations, or where does that division lie? So I think it's really important to start off thinking that the population are patients, and quite frankly, that's not the case. Maybe those that you're engaging in are patients, but then it's got its limitations there as well. So I think you have a opportunity that the academy doesn't have, you know, and so I would hope that you would not infuse your perspective into the work that you're doing so it can infuse and help those in the academy do a better job.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? I'm going to switch up to a very lighter note here. So, you know, I'm a Nigerian. Do you have any questions online? Okay. All right. Let me switch on a couple of lighter notes here. Obviously, with your role in Nigeria, you know, just tell us how did that come about, and you know, what was your favorite moment about on that time?
Well, that started probably in early 70s. I'm a Pan-African, unapologetic. And as I was in graduate school, then there were a lot of Africans in public health, you know, and a large number of them were from Nigeria. So when I went through all that you do in public health, you know, you learn, if nothing else, that disease is global. You know, it ain't in your office only, it's global. So if you have that lens, it's more than the United States. And so after my graduate training, I said, I need to find out about what's going on the continent. And I applied to 4 or 5 different countries, and Nigeria gave me the opportunity. And the real good part about it is I learned far more than I taught. And that's not the case, that's not the admitted case when folk do stuff on the continent. So it was a tremendous opportunity. I went there as a public health professional because I was in the dental school, but I was working more equally as important with the Institute of Child Health with one of my heroes, Professor Ransom Kuti. You know, and if you know anything about Nigerian health, you know that name. You know, and so I worked directly with him, and I again learned far more than I taught. So I used to go back every couple of years just to learn more, not to teach more, but to learn more, and then continues. And a lot of my colleagues who were students at the time are doing stuff all over the world, including being here in this country. So I have a connection with Nigeria that I'm very proud of.
Excellent. I hope that serves as encouragement for anybody who wants to visit. There is a deeper connection back in the roots. Any questions before I ask my last question? Just a quick housekeeping thing. I know Tyre said earlier on with the QR codes. Once again, please, we look forward to your feedbacks on the surveys. If you want to get in touch with us, let us know in what capacity and how we can all build a team of network and work together as one to improve our outcome in our society and our community in general. Also, for some of the physicians that are in the house online, please make sure that you're registered. Make sure you click on the QR code. If you're not, we will be sending the emails out for the CE credits and instructions on how to do that. So please register. I think we'll have some folks outside just in case you've not gotten their registration, so you can get a chance to tap into that credit.
Let me say one thing so we'll be real clear. If somebody talks to you or asks you about what happened in Tuskegee and they start off with the Tuskegee syphilis study, you know they don't know. So if you start off with the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee, a different conversation. Because if you say Tuskegee, then the folk from Tuskegee will not give you an answer that you want to hear. So start off with the correct question, and I believe the question is more important than the answer. So the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee is long, but it's important. And I think you'll learn a lot. And just also know that we still don't know. And it's okay to say I don't know. And we still don't know. But we still working on it, and we'll find out.
Excellent. Well, my final question was really going to be about, which I think you kind of echoed into, is what is your take on the future of healthcare and equity within our community?
Yeah, I've got a bias about equity. And that bias is that equity is philosophical, but we can achieve equity if the healthiest folk get sicker. It doesn't mean that the folk who are less healthy get better. So I listened to the transition over time from black-white to minority health, and now health equity. And all through those changing names, nothing has changed. In '85, there were 60,000 excess deaths in the black population. That is more than you would expect if you use the race, ethnicity, and age and gender of the white population. 60,000 in 1985. Okay, in 1992, it gone from 60,000 to 83,000. Same criteria, but the excess deaths increased in the black population. And then the language changed soon after to health equity. And so everybody talks about health equity. I would argue that we ought to talk about the health of the black population and the health of people of color instead of or in addition to health equity. And it will be a different conversation. And I hope you will continue the conversation about the health of the black community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. We appreciate your insight and what we've done. I want to take this moment to just say a big thank you to our sponsors. I want to say thank you very much, Decatur. We appreciate your participation in this phase, and you guys being a leader in terms of building trust in our communities and participating in clinical trial. Nova Nordisk is not here, but if you're listening, we appreciate you guys as well. Thank you to American Clinical Trials, South Atlanta, Primary Care as our place right there. And where's Tayo? Tayo, please come. I want to say a big thank you to Tayo. You know, when we put all these things together, there's a lot that happen on stage, but the reality is there's 10 times more that happen behind the scene. And whatever you see here, if you like it, she's responsible for it. So please, I want everybody to give her a round of applause. Please, come on. We're going to get you shy. That's okay. And then you get back. Thank you very much. We appreciate the work that you've done. To all of our partners, our colleagues, Dr. Torp, I appreciate you. Andrea, our panelists, Enriquez, Dr. Ellis, where's Mr. Stanley and Corey. Once again, big thank you to you all for participating. I want to take a big shout out to my parents. They found a way to make it. Daddy flew from DC back here. So thank you very much to my parents. Thank you. We appreciate you guys. And I hope this has been an engaging conversation. I hope we continue to do this in our community. And I hope that we get feedbacks and we get a lot more participation. So until next time, Dr. Powell, thank you very much, sir. We look forward to your continuous mentor. Before I finish, let me say this about Dr. Powell. I used to be Dr. Powell's medical student, I don't know, maybe about 14, so many years back. And one of the things I loved the most about Dr. Powell at the time was he was one of the first physicians that I met at the time when I was still working on the Hill, when I was still rotating, who never forgot he was once a medical student. There's this concept that once we become experts, we were born that way and we never went through a process. And so ever since then, he's given me a lot of mentorship, myself, Dr. Torp, and the whole gang of us out there, and he's unwavering in his support. Dr. Powell is one of those guys who, when they want to, when you need a network, they don't just make the phone call. They don't just send you the email. They walk you into the person's office and make sure that you see those persons. So once again, Dr. Powell, thank you very much for your support. I appreciate it. And to everybody, thank you. We appreciate this, and we hope we can do this again. Thank you.